I don't know. Okay, I can't do it, is what I'm going to assume for now. Anyways, I'm ready when you are.
Okay, let's do it. Hello, everyone. At long last, I am interviewing Ninetails. We have come full circle. I was inspired to do this project in part because of the GamerGate debate I had with Ninetails a few months ago, and now I'm interviewing her as one of the final interviews for the book. How are you doing, Ninetails?
Well, it's been a week, and I'm getting used to a new machine, so this might be a janky interview, but I'll do my best.
Okay, that's all I ask. So, a few months ago, you had a very negative opinion of GamerGate. In that time, you and I have interacted a fair amount. You've also met some other people involved with the GamerGate community. Has your opinion changed on it?
Uh, Crap. Now I don't know if I'm muted. Okay,
Uh,
I'm not. Okay, so, I would say not a whole lot. It is a lot more nuanced. Like, it's not just like tear down Gamergate kind of mentality. Last thing I want to be is like Angry Jack. But, I think there's a lot of nuance to this whole thing.
A nuance in what way?
Well, for instance, the argument about whether or not it's about ethics in gaming journalism or not is kind of missing the issue. What really is the issue is should there have been anything done about the harassment and the violence that was faced, and who should be held accountable? The difficult thing about that is that not a lot of accountability can actually be found in people per se, aside from the notable alt-right figures who made their name through Gamergate. Uh, what I would say is that as a whole, Gamergate is technically comprised of two movements: the far right, reactionary, they just hate feminism altogether kind of side, and the side I see you as being more on now, which is the more moderate, like uh, you you pushed back on what people like Anita Sarkeesian said because you were somewhat afraid it was true, and it's easier to just convince yourself that these people are awful people than actually address what they said row by row.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm afraid that what Anita Sarkeesian said is true. I think that's doing a little bit of mind reading from me.
This is well, you asked me what I've gleaned. Um, you know, I I don't think I've seen you go step by step for that, and I have looked to see what content you've made, and nothing seemed to fit that bill. So, frankly, I didn't invest a lot of time in it from there because I'm not big on Oppo research or anything like that. Um, and my time is being sucked up by a lot of real life stuff right now. What I will say is that, you're a person, Tachyon, and what I'm saying is a generality for a reason. It's because the movement as a whole brought in people and gained popularity through, like, for example, manipulated social media platforms, which took advantage of things like algorithms to forward narratives that otherwise probably wouldn't make the front page of something like, say, Reddit, and specifically r/all.
What do you mean by manipulated the algorithms?
Well, we can agree that like gamers are tech savvy, right?
I mean, as a general, well, I would assume that they might possess like some moderately more technical knowledge than the average person, but like that probably depends because gamers is such like a huge category of people that includes everyone from like a 5-year-old kid who's playing Minecraft to someone who's been who built their own gaming PC, right? These are all classified as gamers, but they're.
Sure. We're gonna need something to inject some nuance then. So forgive me if this word is a bit fresh, but I think that there's something that we can point to then called geek masculinity and sort of techno culture around that. Does that make sense?
Can you define geek masculinity in technoculture?
Sure. Well, for one thing, it is a cult, like, sorry to, be ontological here, but it is a culture that values expertise in technologies, um, where you probably talk about technology and value people who have expertise on that more, and it might be considered like not something that people in the real world care about as much, but in online spaces, these things are very accelerated. Does that make sense?
Well, I would agree that some gamers do care about technology, and I don't know if like,
Sure.
and I guess like to some extent, if you're going to admire a video game, you're going to have to, on some level, probably admire like the
I do have a
technical,
list of
the technical
things
skills that
just
went into making that product because it's something you care about. It's something that you value, which is why you consider yourself a gamer, right? Just like someone who values movies and considers himself a cinephile, like that person probably is going to have like some degree of appreciation for the filmmaking process, right?
Oh, that reminds me, not to sidetrack, but have you ever seen On Cinema at the cinema?
No, I don't believe so.
Oh, okay. Do you know Tim Heidecker from Tim and Eric?
No, sorry.
Oh, damn, you're missing out on some good media. I don't know if you watch TV much or anything like that, but
No, not too
actually,
much anymore.
on Cinema is more online now. But anyways, he's just like this wannabe film expert. And it's funny because his main thing is like every time he talks about a video, he just like obsesses on the runtime and what that means. It's really quite funny, and for people who do know, it is a good representation of that, where he kind of is like this hyper rational person because he thinks that that's what expertise is like you're super rational, and like everything about film just makes so much sense to you. You're the clearest person in the room. Another thing, and this is getting more into what Anita Sarkeesian was talking about. Uh, Sorry, let me just check my notes here. I didn't get a chance to review them. So, what when we've talked about Gamergate in the past, you've mentioned that like, well, where do we put the blame, right? Like, who do we say is at fault here? Because it really seems like an amorphous, self-organized thing. Would you agree?
Well, sure. I mean, like when you say blame for harassment, this is something you said earlier. You said, who do we hold accountable for the harassment or violence? Uh, well, first off, I disagree with the idea that there was any violence. Nobody in the whole Gamergate thing seemed to face any violence by any traditional metric of the term. If anything, uh, Anita Sarkeesian did receive bomb threats at one of her events, and so did many of the Gamergate people at several of their events, including at least I believe three Gamergate events received bomb threats. No actual bombs, of course, but
Well, there are also, well-recorded death threats, people saying that they should get death threats online. And I don't think you can really downplay it as much as you are once you acknowledge that Zoe Quinn had to move from like one place to the next. And I don't think anyone on the side of Gamergate had to do that as a result of the harassment they faced.
well, I don't know about Zoe Quinn. I do know that Brianna Wu's claim about having fled her home is dubious to say the least.
I'm not going to defend Brianna. I read enough of Zoe Quinn's book to know that she claims that like explicitly.
Yeah, well, Zoe Quinn has also claimed a lot of things that haven't been true.
Aren't you? So you're going to assume that this thing isn't also true? Isn't that kind of like a substitution rather than a real argument?
No. Here's what I would say. Obviously, anybody who sends sort of mean messages online or calls bomb threats into events, stuff like this, I don't support that. But I also don't think that we should place a higher degree of emphasis on the conscious experience of, say, Brianna Wu or Zoe Quinn or Anita Sarkeesian. I don't think that their conscious experience is of any greater importance than my own conscious experience, or that of the tens of thousands of people involved with Gamergate, including many of the people who I've interviewed.
Sure, but that's like a privilege you have because you haven't been forced out of your home, for instance.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if some of the anti-GamerGate people claim that they were forced out of their homes, and it turns out that they've been lying.
But who from the anti-Gamergate side has claimed to be pushed out of their homes because of the harassment
Oh, Brianna Wu,
they
right?
face?
And you said yourself you won't
No,
defend her.
sorry. I meant to say who of the Gamergaters because I misheard what you're saying. Let's move on because that was just me mishearing what you said. Oh, I just realized I should mute my phone. I don't remember where I put it. That's great. Okay, I got it. So, when it comes to what I was getting at with the technoculture thing is that we can agree that there are like really only two spaces prior to, speedrunning or like professional gaming that gamers really came together, especially in 2013 and 2014, and these were online spaces, right? Either in the online gaming world or in specific online spaces where gaming was a subject, most notably 4chan, 8chan, and Kotaku in Action. Is there any disagreement there?
Well, Kotaku actually didn't exist in 2013, neither did GamerGate.
I
But
sorry, I
people,
didn't mean to claim that. I was just trying to draw a timeline.
I think that people have been discussing games online for decades, actually. You can
Sure.
find forums in the 90s. You can find people playing online in the 90s, even the 80s. Actually, you'll find quite a few people, and you could go back to different multi-user dungeons that were quite popular in the 80s, bulletin board systems, the 70s, net trek, things like this. I think that gaming has a very proud history online, and I think it's great. It's an interesting topic to explore.
Yeah, let's explore that pride for a second because I think that that comes into like the privilege I was talking about and where we can find the resistance Gamergate had to perhaps effective criticism by people like Anita Sarkeesian. Um, where when would you say you first became aware of the idea that women feel pushed out of video games?
I don't know. I don't know that that was ever really I mean, I've known a lot of female gamers over the course of my life. And obviously, I have noticed that sometimes female gamers, especially in online multiplayer games, do experience a different kind of experience over voice chat than male gamers do. And I think that that's something that like pretty much everybody recognizes that like nobody really disputes. And
Why
that's
do you
not
think
something
that is though? Why do you think that happens?
like a whole host of different reasons. Like when you're dealing with like a lot of like preteen and teenage boys, so the 12-year-old kid who's going to be playing Call of Duty behind uh, a degree of anonymity is probably going to feel encouraged to say super edgy stuff, and so they're going to say the N word and they're going to say stuff like that. But like, yeah, basically.
So your analysis of this is that women are just put off by edgy 12-year-olds, but men are immune to this somehow.
Um, I don't think that men are. What do you mean by men are immune to it?
Well, we need a factor to describe something that affects women that doesn't affect men, and I can think of plenty of men who would be put off by edgy 12-year-olds on the internet.
Well, I think that because these are oftentimes boys who are going through puberty, they probably are going to have a more sexual, a more sexual kind of communication with the female
Okay,
gamers.
fine. Do you think that maybe there's some implicit bias, some internalized misogyny that's picked up from some video games they've played ever?
Probably not. There doesn't seem to be studies that show that.
Well, it's not really a well-studied thing. There's not really studies that debunk it either. So what I'm asking you though is you're well aware that like feminist would point to this sort of space and this sort of like default for 12-year-old edgy boys in these spaces to be misogyny as some sort of symptom of the things Anita Sarkeesian was pointing to. Do you think that's fair?
I think some people would make that argument, though the burden of proof is on them to demonstrate that. And there have been some studies that show, like the German study, uh, that show that video games cause people to be less, or they don't say, sorry, it doesn't show that people, it causes them to be less sexist, but it shows that people who play video games become less sexist over time, as well as people who don't play video games.
is that okay? So, that's the sort of thing that you want to go through piece by piece instead of running with that. So I'm not avoiding it, but I just don't feel comfortable with addressing it head on. Well, what I will say is that if video games have the power to do that, that could be a recent study where these sort of things have been addressed, or just whether it's through time and humans maturing or through game developers seeing something like tropes versus women in gaming and thinking maybe I do need to do some things differently, and that actually changing perceptions and attitudes. Would I would you agree that video games have the power to change perceptions and attitudes? Because I certainly think that.
Um, to some extent, probably, but not in the way that people often claim, this sort of like monkey see, monkey do way, or in
No,
this,
no, definitely not. It
yeah.
like I said, I we need to be nuanced about this, right? So whenever I say something like this, and for sure point out the nuance, but you can take for granted that I'm talking about this in a way that is open to nuance.
Can video games influence the way people think about topics? Probably to some minute degree, though it isn't really. We're talking about something that its impact. One, it doesn't. There's no studies that show at all that it makes people more sexist. Um, which is the claim that people are making, right? It makes them worse human beings. There doesn't seem to be any evidence of that at all.
Well, sexism is not really something you can prove scientifically, right? It'd more be like the implicit biases that happen along quote unquote sexist lines as a lens we are using.
Well, if you have a so would you say that the claim that video games cause sexism is unfalsifiable?
It's too reductive to actually take into a lab setting.
I mean,
Too
you
reductive
can.
to be practical.
I mean, people have though, like the German study, and they don't show that. And people said the same thing about violence for decades, and
Well, this
that
is like
proved to be wrong.
you've given me more questions than answers because as somebody who does read a lot of scientific literature, not to toot my own horn, just to point out that I've learned to question things like the methods section, right? Especially on more social science things, because it can be very easy to kind of tweak things like definitions on somewhat subjective things to fit the outcomes that you're seeking, whether it's conscious or unconscious is a totally other thing. And by the way, this is what I meant to say to you earlier when you accused me of mind reading. Um, sure, but bear in mind, like I'm not actually claiming to know if this is a conscious effort or a subconscious thing from you, Tachyon. This is like when I see you pushing back on the notion that there is a connection between these things, all I'm saying is that this could be a very subconscious thing, even though I see you as a very decent person.
Well, I'm not even sure I've been quote unquote pushing back on it necessarily because, as you've seen some of my interviews, I usually end up arguing your position when I'm interviewing pro
Sure.
GamerGate people, at least, because I end up
I've
having
seen
to
that a few
steel
times.
man it. Yeah.
But I do want to point out that while you are capable of doing that because I think you are trying, that doesn't mean that you haven't subconsciously um, and practically, but I'm just going to focus on the subconscious aspect, subconsciously benefited from the privilege of being removed from the actual detrimental effects of Gamergate, which was the misogyny, which was things like absolute backlash over anybody who expressed anti-GG sentiments, even sometimes in the most remote ways, which is technically how it started with Brianna Wu. She was more or less a nobody prior to that,
Well,
online at least. Online at least.
well, Brianna Wu's story. There's the story she tells people.
I don't ever want to defend her, by the way.
Right,
Like
but her story started
she's
with
her
her
own fucking
trolling
person.
people. Well, actually, apparently her story started with her going on a podcast and claiming she was receiving 50 different mean tweets per day. But this never caught on. This claim she made,
Okay.
the media never talked about it. She never really got any attention from it.
I have a
So then
different
she,
source.
so then
Just to be
she,
clear, sorry, Tachyon,
no,
but
no, but
just to
then
be clear,
she
I do have a
created the
different
bro lols.
source.
She created the
Oh,
bro lols troll account where she pretended to be a GamerGate supporter for about a month. and she purposely tried to false flag the GamerGate community. It's true. Um, and
I mean, she
she
probably saw it as vindication for doing what had been done to, people like Anita Sarkeesian and stuff like that.
well, her claim is that she was trying to satirize them. That's what she later defended that claim by saying. But then she kind of rewrote history again. So this is like the third rewrite of history from her. Uh, in October of 2014, she says that she fled her home, but the weekend she fled her home, it never happened. Or it appears that it never happened because she ended up going to this convention where she was already scheduled to speak at.
I'll agree. She's like the perfect lolcow for you to distract from more professional people like Sarkeesian.
I don't attack like Sarkeesian. I don't attack Brianna Wu either. I've been trying to. When I was interviewed by
I mean,
Counterpoints.
you have a lot to say about her. It seems like paying attention to her more than a Sarkeesian is benefiting you in some way, to me at least.
Okay, that's probably true. Because look, I don't. I mean, I've actually I think I've been pretty fair though with Brianna Wu. Because I only stick to the facts. I
That's
don't.
yeah. I'm just talking about fixation. I'm not talking about fairness. And yeah, you are a very fair person, Tachyon. That's why I'm still in your server. And I just want to be clear, for anyone listening in the server, even those people who may not like me as much, I like your server. I think it's a really cool place. There's always people chatting. There's some people who I think are a little silly with their views, but that's another story. Um, what I will say is I think your server is also emblematic of what Gamergate was like. You had a spectrum of people, but a well, you've attracted a lot of people to your server. So I say this with the caveat of, except for the people you brought into interview, um, a culture of people who feel more comfortable to speak when they are pro GG, or sorry, yeah, pro GG.
Oh, that's probably true. That might be unfortunate. But it's probably just because they outnumber the anti-Gamergate people. Is that fair to say?
So yeah, sure. I just want to point out though that like one of the strongest criticisms that like at least when it's the left attacking the far right and not GG, it is sound that um, the end results of that was a silencing of a lot of people who otherwise probably wouldn't have become famous. Sure, there's a lot of people who became famous after pushback from GG, but also probably would have gone on having a mediocre career. But because of saying one thing about Gamergate in the wrong place at the wrong time, they received the suite of treatment that so many people who have been anti-Gamergate have faced. Um, and so my whole point is that even if you are who you are, Tachyon, and you watched this all happen from a distance, I think you opted for that at the time, not less so now, but at the time because it felt safer than actually thinking like, am I the baddie? Is Sarkeesian right?
Why I'm like I'm not gonna pretend that I was the same person 10 years ago that I am today. But
I hope you're not. I
I
hope you've
was
improved somewhat.
even back then. I mean, I don't know if you saw it, but I just recently re-released an old debate I did with Miss Sonata, and this conversation we had, this debate we had. Um, I think it was an extremely civil conversation, and I think that that's how like most of the debates that I did back then were like. Well, at least the one-on-ones. When you had like the 17 people jumping into one call, yelling over each other, that was some crazy stuff. But anytime it was like a smaller discussion, I think I was always a very civil person, and I think that you say that the anti-Gamergate people, they might have been silenced to some extent because they got a lot of backlash and they felt like they were outnumbered. But I think like the reality is, or at
I
least
don't
my
think they felt
perception.
outnumbered. I think most people who would have supported them felt demotivated when they saw the harassment those people faced. So they didn't actually get the support they would have gotten had this been like just a debate.
Well, they didn't want to have a debate. They didn't want to have a discussion, right? Anita Sarkeesian has been making videos criticizing video games as being sexist and causing real-world sexism, and criticizing violence in video games for almost a decade, oh, over a decade
So you're
now, and
telling
not a,
me I've never.
she never once debated a single person on the topic, never once had a
So if I
conversation with
go to
somebody who
YouTube,
disagreed with her.
I'm pretty sure that I already know the answer to this, but if I go on YouTube and I type in Sarkeesian panel, I wonder if anything about feminism and gaming will come up. So there's how to be a feminist. That sounds a little bit circle jerky, so there's a video of her getting verbal abuse at a VidCon panel. Do you know anything about this VidCon 2017 verbal abuse? She's definitely at a panel.
Only vaguely, though I'm not sure from what I do recall. Again, it's been so long, but I don't think it was verbal abuse. I'm pretty sure it was her singling out people in the audience and calling them garbage people.
Well, okay, can you give me an example?
Like Sargon of Akkad, who was there.
Sure, but Sargon of Akkad also put the limelight on himself, so he did that to himself, and getting offended by that is kind of shows you're not fit for the job, in my opinion.
Well, I don't think that calling someone a garbage human is harassment. But I do think it's shitty behavior.
I think that this is like a public official thing, and she probably substantiated that by saying more than just he's a garbage person, knowing how panels tend to work.
Well, he wasn't on the panel. See, this is the thing. She never once engaged with her
Like,
critics, and that's fine. That she doesn't
like,
have to engage with her critics, but she also shouldn't claim that everyone who
so there were
disagrees with her
no
is a harasser.
critics. There were no critics on a VidCon panel.
I don't. Again, I haven't seen the panel. It's been like maybe 10 years ago I did.
I wish I had watched it now, and I wish I'd known that this particular point would come up, which is one of the things that's kind of frustrating about you, Tachyon, is when talking to you, you're very great to talk to, you're very eloquent, and you're certainly fair, but you do kind of stonewall things into these very niche issues. And I brought this one on myself by saying I'm pretty sure I can find evidence of her on panels and like talking to other people. Um, but it seems like YouTube wants to give me mostly results of her getting yelled at VidCon, so that's blocking up like an actual count. Um, I think that this is all very relative, and you, I doubt that you've actually done like a check of like how many times has she addressed her critics,
Well,
because
I do remember at the time. Yes, she never addressed her critics. She called them
sure,
harassers.
when people say something like that though, like she never addressed her critics, that does give me pause. Just because like it seems more like, yeah, like that's possible, but the more likely thing is that you haven't looked enough. Because that's generally how the internet works, is like absolutions are never true.
Well, unfortunately, in this case, and look, maybe there's like one example out there where she did, but I don't think she ever did actually. I really do earnestly say that. I don't think she ever addressed her critics at all. Certainly not in a
So
conversation with them.
I am familiar with Zoe Quinn doing that though.
Maybe Zoe Quinn did. I don't know, but
Well, in a lot of her
we weren't talking about Zoe Quinn
she
though.
write articles or did she do blogs? Sure, I yeah. Well, you jump topics a lot too, so
Oh, I
that's
do.
chill. Um, so well, I forget if she did a blog or if she was writing for a news thing, and I can try to look it up again. But I'm 90% certain she would take quotes from her critics and address them in her work. So, like again, this doesn't work ubiquitously, and I think the key thing is like on one hand you can say like yeah, Anita Sarkeesian never addressed her critics. On the other hand, I can just as easily say maybe she didn't because she had been so fucking traumatized.
I don't think she has like an obligation to address her critics, but I do think that it is a form of cowardice.
Sure.
And I think that if you are going to put ideas
I
out
tend
there,
to be
other people have the right to criticize them. And you can't just
sure,
say, or you shouldn't just say that they're all just a bunch of evil misogynists who hate women.
but if I walk into a Discord server and I try to have a debate with them, and a lot of times these things are not broadcasted when they first start up, these dramas, and a bunch of shit just gets flung right away. I'm likely to leave and not address like that server aside from only having bad things to say about it too. So I'm more like just to let you know, as someone who's had similar experiences like death threats and harassment, far less like severe, um, but still scary stuff. It it's hard not to relate to her on that and to just be like, fuck these people. If like talking to you just gets me harassed, which pretty sure talking to Sargon of Akkad as an anti-GG person probably would get you harassed. It's totally fair to not want to do that and to only want to deal with this person from a distance.
Well, I actually interviewed one of Sargon's fans who harassed people, though he wasn't a GamerGate person. He didn't know what GamerGate was. He watched other Sargon videos. Um, so yeah, I'm sure you probably will. But
But
Sargon
sorry,
also had
did
Sargon.
he harass?
Oh,
Can I just ask real quick? Did he harass Anita Sarkeesian as a result of that?
he says he doesn't remember if he harassed Anita or not, but he did send. I don't know if it like technically qualifies as a harassment. Probably not. But he did send, or at least not the legal definition. But he did send a lot of like really mean tweets at Brianna Wu and possibly Zoe Quinn, though he doesn't really remember. He thinks he might have sent her like one
Okay,
tweet once or something.
sure. So my question is
But
like
also
you got
Sargon
into
had hundreds
legal
of thousands of
definitions.
subscribers, right? So that's it's worth pointing out. He had hundreds of thousands of subscribers. Anybody who has like that big of a following, or even just like 10,000, you're going to get a couple bad eggs who are going to send mean messages to people. That's just the nature of the internet. It's going to happen if you're talking with Destiny. It's going to happen if you're talking with Hassan. It's going to happen if you're talking with Vosh. It's going to happen if you're talking to anybody.
Well, I find it interesting that you said a couple because it wasn't a couple, especially not for the like the real victims here. It was dozens at least for some and hundreds for many others, especially when Sarkon dug their name out of the trash. And so my problem is that, well, you have the privilege to say that it was a minimal amount and to say, well, I don't see a lot of evidence of these things, so it can't be there. If there was any sort of notion of actually listening to victims, then their claims would have to hold at least some water. And if their claims hold at least some water, saying just a couple rotten eggs, no, this was a gross miscarriage of Sargon's responsibilities as an influencer to prevent his audience from doing that, which he did none of. And this is the
Well,
biggest
to be
criticism
clear,
of
he very
Gamergate.
much was very clear that he did not want anyone to contact the people he criticized in his videos. And also,
Do you
if you're
detect sarcasm well? Because I've seen those clips and that was sarcastic as fuck.
no, I don't think it was.
That was 100%. Oh, I hope these people don't get doxxed. Oh no, that would be really bad, wouldn't it? Oh no,
No,
what a
no, 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 no. I think you just made that quote up just now.
No, that was not a quote. That was hyperbole. I thought that that might be clear because I went hee hee hee
But
hee, which
also, but
Sargon
look, the
doesn't
thing
do.
is, the thing is, and if you're on the internet and you're expressing a lot of opinions, you're going to get pushback on that, especially if you're talking about really controversial topics. And yeah, you're going to get
Sure,
pushback, and some of the people who push back against you are going to be assholes. As for like what
but there's a
rises like the
line
level of
between assholes and
harassment,
harassment.
no, well,
Yeah,
well,
exactly.
let's
Sorry,
talk
my
about
bad. Go
let's
ahead.
talk about harassment. I've read the FBI report on GamerGate. Have you?
Not fully. I think the last time you brought this up, though, and I did go back to check some of these things, you did take things out of context. So, are you able to bring up these paragraphs on like a watch stream so that way we can look at these together?
Uh, the paragraphs from the FBI
Yeah.
report.
So that way, if you're going to cite something, just let me see the entire paragraph because a lot of times, what you said it says is technically true, like it's true in a vacuum, but the report says a lot, right? And when you cherry pick that, that takes a lot of context out of what's being said.
Well, you're accusing me of taking stuff out of context. What specifically did I'm pulling it up right now?
I don't recall at this point. I wasn't able to go back over our last debate because, like I said, this week has been far more busy than I could have
Well,
planned
I mean,
for.
like,
And
you're making an accusation against me that I'm like being dishonest. So
this was my impression from our last debate and having checked some of these things afterwards. I
I
didn't
didn't
get to
bring up
write
the
these down.
GamerGate FBI report in the first debate. It never came up once because
I
I
thought it
didn't
did.
use no. At least I don't believe
I
so.
checked
That's not
it.
a
You brought it up. You brought it up in response to somebody then, and I checked it. Sorry, I guess
Pinko
I have.
merchant, probably.
Right. That actually makes a lot of sense. And now you just the flood of memories came back, so that's 100% it.
So what did I say that
I
was
don't
dishonest?
always, I don't exactly remember. Like these are specifics. I just remember watching that debate now. Um,
It wasn't a debate. It was a
you
conversation.
sounded like you were about to cite things. That's why I asked you to at least bring them up um, on screen so that way we can see the entire paragraph, such that we can, have more context to each quote.
Well, I think I said a couple of different things about this during the conversation with Pinko Merchant. One of which, here, I guess I can pull it up on Firefox.
Yeah, just stream it to me so that we're always on the same page because I don't want to control F something, find something else, and it can. This has happened to me the last time I tried just being in sync with people, and it got really frustrating. And then I looked back on the footage, and I was like, "Is that all it was?" Because yeah, they were looking at a much different part than I was. Oh, seems to be working.
Though I'm not sure the audience will be able to see it. Well, they might actually, but because I've switched screens. But yeah,
Yeah, you're
what I think
using
I said, the
OBS,
claims I
right?
made about this, I think, were that some of the threats that they looked at were very clearly trolls. Like the guy who claimed that he planted over 9,000 bombs inside the auditorium of the college. And I also said that the um, the FBI believed that some of the or the FBI had evidence to believe that some of the threats were coming from a community known as somethingawful.com, not exactly a hub of Gamergate activity. I think you would agree.
Can you search Kotaku for a sec?
Oh, you can't
See what it
search.
says.
You can't search the FBI document. It's a real pain in the ass.
Okay, yeah. And I think I remember now what happened when I looked at it. Like, I did look at a lot of, I found some things relating to what you said, but it is a bit of a mess.
I'm trying to find the something awful claim. But anyway, this is for the book, not for the stream. So what do
Yeah.
you want to bring up from this?
I don't recall anything like specifically. So my criticism begins and ends there. And if you want to claim that it's debunked because I can't think of specifics, go right ahead.
Well, I think that if you're going to accuse me of being dishonest, I think you should have something to back that up.
No, not dishonest, just Tachyon. You understand the difference between a claim that you were dishonest and that you were cherry picking, right?
No, I think I was pretty clear throughout it that some of the threats um, didn't seem like jokes, or at least didn't seem like jokes in the same way. And look, I think that this actually is a really interesting report
And I could have
because the
accidentally
fact
cherry
is,
picked
like,
that
it looks like
because
this
trust me,
massive
these guys.
harassment campaign,
Right.
this massive harassment campaign that that I guess you believe existed doesn't really seem to have existed at all. It seems like the FBI had a few cases where people sent in threats that were investigated, and that's basically it. There's not this horde of tens of thousands or even hundreds of
But
threats.
why does it need to be real?
Well, I mean, if you believe that Gamergate's a harassment campaign, one, there's no evidence that any of this was tied to Gamergate at all, and two, it doesn't seem like
No,
they're.
no, I meant real because a lot of like when I read through this, a lot of these were about whether or not there was a bomb, right? Like that's what the FBI is really concerned about. They don't really do a lot of shit about online harassment as its own thing. Now I understand this is called Gamergate, but I think that has to do with identifying if Gamergate was an actual bomb threat.
Well, the FBI did actually investigate, and they did talk to. You say they don't do anything about harassment. They did end up actually confronting one of the people. They may have been a minor, but they did end up confronting them, and he did apologize and say he wouldn't do it again. I don't know if
I think I
because he
heard
was a
about that.
minor.
Yeah.
That person, I don't know if that specific person was a minor. That's what
But
it
was that for
appears like.
harassment or for a bomb threat?
Well, again, we have to define harassment. I think if you're talking about harassment and you're talking about the FBI, you're talking about the criminal definition of harassment, not somebody sent me a mean tweet saying you suck, which is what Anita Sarkeesian does define harassment as, by the way. She herself said at the United Nations, she said harassment isn't just the threats.
Well, what percentage of
Harassment is the
sorry,
daily comments that I see from people saying that you suck. That's what she said
what, per,
harassment is.
what percentage of death threats online do you think actually get prosecuted?
Probably a very small amount.
And probably not many more actually get investigated very much, right? Because it probably takes a lot to get them to investigate something to in the first place.
I don't know. I mean, you could probably file a police report. I mean, I filed a police report when I got actually harassed, I guess you could say.
Sure, but a police report is many, many steps away from the FBI investigating something, right?
Yeah, sure. But and look,
So
what's the
my
point you're trying to make?
well, that the FBI wouldn't have necessarily had a good sample because unless they went through literally every police report,
Well, here's
um,
what they did do. They asked the people involved, Anita Sarkeesian, Zoe Quinn, and Brianna Wu. They asked them, send me all of the threats that you've been receiving, and it doesn't seem like there were that many of them actually.
sure, but that could also be evidence that people who get harassed or endure bomb threats or death threats, emotionally distance themselves from that stuff instead of trying to collect memories. Like it's
Could be
fair,
the case that they decide not to give any evidence to the FBI. Um,
like
One, they
generally
also
speaking,
could be clear
I'm not
that they decide not to give evidence to the media. Could also, but and they also don't ever provide any evidence of their own.
well,
I'm
you
just
said
saying
it
if you're going to make big claims about people, including about the GamerGate community, shouldn't you provide evidence that the GamerGate people
you
are
said they
harassers?
provided some. You said they provided
Well,
some.
not that GamerGate people were. No, they provided evidence that like some people, clearly like a few people, or at least
But
one,
what would that be a result of?
at least one person, I guess. At least one
But what would that
person
be a result
did
of?
did send in bomb threats and a mass shooting threat to Anita Sarkeesian's event. And of course, many of our events also received bomb threats. And
There's also a point in there where they attribute the lack of information to the fact that many people who did that use like things like Tor and Onion proxies and ways to, distance themselves such that, it would be hard to find out who actually did a lot of this.
well, yeah, of course, people who do criminal things on the internet are probably going to value their anonymity to a high degree. That's not a big shocker.
So I just want to point out, by the way, like, I think it's more normal for people to not be like obsessive documenters or like Oppo researchers of the people going after them, especially when it's like arguably in the amount of hundreds, if you're actually willing to listen to victims. Um, if you're talking about journalistic integrity, there are plenty of other uh, things I think you should be citing here. For one thing, um, Ian Danskin's Angry Jack series, the series of 6 videos, I don't think describes you to a T, but I think it describes, I'll say conservatively 45% of you and probably more of you back then, as it does. Like I've been Angry Jack too at times because as he points out, Angry Jack is not a function of like what you believe or anything like that. Because um, GamerGate, as I've stated at the beginning, was largely a product of the platforms they were on. But it's more about like privileged people coming together to reject the notion that they have to consider something that doesn't truly affect them.
Do you mind if I bring up something personal between you and me? And I did mention to do this in private before, but I don't even talked about it
Oh no, it's
publicly
fine.
with you. You might
Um,
know where I'm going with this. Um,
like
no,
I've gone
I
hard.
want to bring this up.
Like if it's me going hard on you, it's
No, it's
because
you. Here's what I want to bring up, and I'm not saying this to like make you out to be like an evil person or whatever. But there was an incident in my Discord server a few months ago, or maybe like a month and a half ago, 2 months ago, I don't know, whatever it was. It was some time ago. And a user named Jack Sheridan, who wasn't even a GamerGate guy, he was someone from the Twitch poll community. He was engaging in debates. He'd been on one of my panels before, because he's not quite a streamer, but he was wanting to become a streamer. Maybe he still does, I don't know. He ended up getting temporarily banned from the server because he was insulting other individuals on the server in personal ways over and over again
He was attacking people
on the
for their
basis of their
identity.
trans identity. I mean, it was attacking people on the basis of their trans identity. Like, I don't care what people say, but you can't assault other users, and you can't assault them because they're trans. That is against the rules, and so he ended up getting temporarily banned. You, not knowing anything about what I was like during Gamergate or what I was like 10 years ago, were like, Tachyon, you need to ban him. And the only reason, this is paraphrasing, the only reason you're not going to ban him is because he reminds you of what you used to be like. You don't fucking know me, Ninetails. You don't fucking know what I was like 10 years ago. You decided in your head, you've created this version of what Tachyon Blue was like during Gamergate with no evidence at all. And you decided this is what Tachyon Blue is like. This was what Tachyon Blue was like during Gamergate. He was this guy who went around insulting people all the time, who would make fun of trans people, and on a personal level, not just critiquing their ideas or whatever. But that's what you thought I was, and no evidence at all. You just assumed. And I
Sure.
criticized you.
Yeah.
I unlike you, you said this publicly. You said this publicly on my server, in front of what 100 other people or whatever, or 80 or whatever it was. I DM'd you in private, and I'm like, hey, I don't like you talking about me like this publicly. You don't know what I was like, and you shouldn't be saying stuff like this about me. And that's when I lost a lot of respect for you.
Crap. I was hoping you were gonna keep going. I started doing. Okay. Um. Crap. Should really finish this, but whatever. So yeah, I was wrong. Like, what else? I'm sorry. I was wrong.
But it's not just something that happened in the past. Now you're assuming too what I was like during Gamergate. You don't know what I was like during Gamergate.
Well, let me verify something that I recall, so I don't get it wrong. But you did have a different identity during Gamergate, right? Like online identity, pseudonym kind of deal.
Yes, I had two different ones technically, but yeah.
And I'm not here to interrogate you on that, just to be clear.
I'm an
What
open
that
book,
does tell
interrogate
me,
away.
well, what that does tell me is that you've done a rebranding, and a rebranding happens for some reasons, but typically in old school internet, it only really happened because somebody was so cringe that it was unignorable. Now, this is just my assumption and my impression of you. And as I've admitted, you've clearly changed a lot since then because I feel like I'm talking to a mature adult who really is only like Angry Jack on paper, but when I actually talk to you, you're a much more reasonable person and able to handle the nuance. So all I'm doing is connecting those dots somewhat carelessly. But then again, I do have to somewhat analyze who I'm talking to. And as far as I'm talking to someone who doesn't put those what happened in those old pseudonyms on the record as much as I would think would be enough for proof that you haven't done, no, I'm not going to say awful things, but haven't contributed to the problem. And all I'm assuming is that you have. So if you think it's unreasonable for me to connect those dots, I don't know what to say to you because I think I'm being reasonable. I think I'm being even somewhat fair because I'm not claiming to know what you've done. And I'm not even claiming to be it was severe, just in line, in lockstep with the things that leftists are trying to call out about Gamergate. And that's okay. You're Tachyon now. I'm talking to Tachyon. Is that fair?
It's fair that no, it's not fair that you did that at the time with the Jack Sheridan thing.
Right, I was totally wrong, and I've apologized.
Yeah,
What
and
I just
it's
said
fine,
though,
whatever.
that
But
little my little diatribe that yes, I do have some assumptions about you, but it's based on these sort of cryptic pseudonyms from the past, and whenever I've seen that from someone who may have also had ties with the alt-right in the past because of something like Gamergate, it makes me as a leftist suspicious, and I have to fill that gap with some information. And the information is that you've changed a lot since then, and it's fair that maybe you don't want to have to carry every little sing every little single thing that's tied to your name then if you're definitely not going to do that anymore. I haven't felt harassed by your server except from Jack's like outlandish behavior. So, you're obviously doing something right now, and I don't think you would condone that anymore.
I don't think I condoned it then.
Okay. I'll take you at your word for it.
And
And
people
not
change their names on the internet for all sorts of reasons. The idea that I'm expected to have the same screen name I had when I was 20 years old, I think is ridiculous.
Well, maybe a good thing to also put in your book is I don't I'm assuming it would be a confession chapter about how it all really started, who you really were, what you really did as far as you can recall. And,
Well, you've uh, I didn't really do anything bad, except for the one time, and
right, like I said, I'm assuming it's a
I
confession
have
thing.
been very I have been very open about that in the book. About I've talked about it openly in the book in interviews with people. And
Yeah, okay,
when I
my
first
bad then.
started this project, I even specifically said, here are some of the mistakes I made during Gamergate. You can read my Kotaku in Action post where I talk about the project and I get people's feedback about the project. I say, hey, look, here are some of the dumb things I did when I was a kid. None of it really arose to the level of harassment. And certainly none of it was the alt right, me being alt right.
But let's say okay, maybe you didn't harass anyone individually, but were you ever say part of like a bandwagon effect that led to someone feeling harassed?
Maybe once, and again, I owned up to that in the beginning. But this user online,
I'm sorry. At least
he's
this is proof I haven't done my Oppo research on you, right?
it is. You're not gonna find a whole lot. I did. Look, I was a YouTuber.
But that's not
I'm. Hey,
like
no, look,
that's a
you can't answer me a
suspicious
question.
thing.
You're not letting me
I
even.
have shut up plenty of times when you ask me not to cut you off. I just want to point out that's suspicious when you say you're not going to find a lot, but you've been around here for like what, over a decade? No, not a decade. Yeah, nearly a decade now, right?
No, because I disappeared off the internet for several years, and I
Oh, my bad.
deleted
Okay.
most of my old videos. I deleted them because I graduated college and I was entering the workforce. I mean, I was already working in college too, actually, but and, and I didn't, because the media lied about Gamergate. I didn't want employers to be like, oh, well, this guy's a harasser.
Look, Tachyon, I'm just going to put it this way. I did get the impression from you at the time, and this I'm just being genuine with you, okay? I'm not saying anything more, anything less, that Jack was probably like you in college. I was wrong. Uh, and I'm saying that because I'm taking your word at face value because I really have no other reason to reject it. Now, if I thought you were still anything like that, though, and this is all I'm trying to say is I clearly see you as a different person now, and I think that's what matters. That you wouldn't do that now, and you wouldn't condone that even if you saw someone doing that. And I
Let's
think
good.
that's that's something everyone on the internet really wants is to not feel like it's to feel like you can have positive social interactions just to be kind of vague about it.
Yeah, I think that this is kind of the problem that the anti-Gamergate people and people who are critical of Gamergate like yourself have, where you assume a large number of negative things about these people who you didn't interact with back then, who you didn't really even know back then, and you're ascribing to them a great deal of negative motivations, and you're ascribing to them a great deal of really bad stuff, and you don't have any of the receipts to show it.
Well, yeah, plenty of people do bring receipts. By the way, I know Yoon wanted to talk to you, and he was very like specific about like what he wanted to respond to. Did you ever get a chance to interview him?
No. Though I don't think
Ah,
he was necessarily anti-Gamergate. He wanted to talk with me
no.
about the Women Action Media study. But it was really late at
Yeah.
night, and we didn't end up discussing that specific thing. It was like 12 o'clock. I had to work the next day, and I think I was maybe intoxicated a little bit. I was a little. So I want to talk about. Let's talk about the time you said. Did you ever? We can circle back to the Yoon thing, okay? But you said,
Oh no, it's no big deal. It was just a side
and
point.
you and I have talked. You and I have talked since then. He actually helped me create the questions that I would ask people. Well, he provided feedback on the questions that I would ask people for this book because I knew that he was a bit more skeptical of the Gamergate stuff, and I wanted to run them by him so that I could be fair in how I ask questions to people. And so he gave me feedback on how I can ask good questions to people who I'm interviewing. Because again,
Okay,
being fair is really important to
actually,
me.
I just remembered something. I did have something to say before we derail from the making assumptions thing. And it's just that like I think you have to take some responsibility for th- uh how the branding of Gamergate does look to your average normie. And I was a normie before I talked to you and had very little real and from the outside perspective, the your average normie views it as like, oh my God, how like this is how bad the internet gets. I don't want to be a part of this. And you have to realize that while this behavior is normalized within gamer spaces, it's alienating to anyone who's trying to join them. Well, most people. Obviously, it filters. So the people who, for one reason or another, aren't join that. But this is where researchers are talking about toxic technoculture. How things like the algorithms lead to uh, something called action network behavior, where the network defines people's actions more than their actual decision making process. Because of the thing I said, where like when you on Reddit, where when you get a mass upvoting of new content, the keywords being upvoting and new content, um, things can be put on the front page regardless of whether or not they're controversial or not. And that seems nice on paper, but at the end of the day, that's what got a lot of the incorrect stuff about Zoe Quinn that was later debunked um, to the forefront and really hurt Gamergate with their whole like we're claiming to do ethics and journalism, yet we're getting things wrong.
Did some people get certain facts wrong about things? Probably, yeah, because you're talking about a large number of people. Many of them are amateur YouTubers. And sure, I'm sure some YouTubers who covered this got specific things wrong.
No, no, it's not about getting specific things wrong. It's about getting the fundamentals that kickstarted the movement wrong. And it's
Like
the
what?
fact that well, Zoe Quinn fucking for reviews.
Well, I don't think that was the claim that was made in the Internet Aristocrat video, and I
It
don't think that
it's
that's the
what
claim. That's more Stephen Totillo lying than anything else. Stephen Totillo said, "Well, Nathan Grayson never reviewed her game, therefore there couldn't have been a conflict of interest." When what Nathan Grayson did do is he promoted her game over 49 other games, and he also uncritically
not
reported
really.
on her involvement in the Polaris Game Jam scandal.
Like when you say promoted, it was a list, right? And he had to pick a game as a header, and Zoe Quinn's name was the header. It just so happened to be that she would receive hate down the line, particularly for I'm mixing up with Sarkeesian and the crowdfunding thing now. I do have a really bad memory for these things, so forgive me. It's not it is a bit of a learning disability, but I try my best. Zoe Quinn started something in 2013 as well, right? How did she piss people off with that? I
Uh,
forget.
2013, I don't know specifically if it was 2013.
Oh
she
no,
has a long history.
2013. Sorry,
She has a long history
2013
of making
was
claims that people are
the
harassing her
fappening.
and she needs them to give her money. She has a very
Well,
long history of doing that.
2013 was the fappening, and I believe she got involved with that somehow, and that's how things her name first came into the oh, this is it was like this the first sort of spark, and in her book she claims she got some harassment for dealing with no. Again,
Well,
I okay,
you're
I don't want to
probably
be I
mistaking
don't want to
something
be wrong.
else.
I'm not
Uh,
trying to lie, believe
yeah.
me. I with my brain, just so everyone's clear, I have a problem taking in information and storing lists or dates, names, and places, and then actually like recalling them if it's more than three. God help me if even if I can store that information. So a lot of these things are hard for me to parse and feel really all this information is really separated out in my memory space. So I am trying to lean on you a bit to recall like I know Zoe Quinn first really like the things like ignited off of the 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 Nathan Grayson thing. Crap, maybe I should look at your chat. But I thought that there was like one more thing that started before that that it was kind of
Well,
like nobody really reported on it.
Zoe Quinn was a goon, but she also a goon being a something awful person who posted on Helldump apparently
Right.
actually. She says that she misses Helldump at least. But she did claim that a prior group of people were harassing her before the GamerGate saga, an online community known as Wizard Chan. The Wizard Chan people deny this allegation, though.
See, I'm so bad at recalling information to do with names. Like, I can't remember if she mentioned that name in her book or not. I just listened to it like 2 days ago. Holy shit. And I didn't get to finish, unfortunately. So it left off. I stopped somewhere after that coming up. Anyways, the point was that a lot of times these things come as a result of when you have this like toxic technoculture to begin with, people who scream the F slur and the R slur at each other, and that's supposed to be like how you show that you're friends, and that keeps away normies. That is how you do end up getting these kind of violent bandwagon things, especially when someone like Anita Sarkeesian has kind of hit a nerve with tropes versus women in gaming as a generality. Even like she pissed people off by saying she was going to raise money before it even came out. And if you want to talk gaming ethics and gaming journalism, there is no way anybody who attacked Anita Sarkeesian for trying to raise money there uh, had cared about that. Because if you're mad at someone trying to raise money for a documentary and just assuming it's wrong, then where's the journalism in that?
Well, again, I don't support anybody harassing anybody. If she probably did receive some mean tweets, I don't know about the Kickstarter thing,
No, it wasn't just mean tweets. See, you're minimizing again.
or maybe she received something else. I don't know.
But this is what I mean
But
about
again,
it all just being cope for you.
well,
Like
no,
this
well,
is all just
let's.
a lot of copium.
I've interviewed a large number of people, and asked them. Well, not I don't ask everybody this question, but I have asked people about Anita Sarkeesian, and I think you'll find that like people involved with the Gamergate thing had like a pretty wide variety of views when she was first entering the space. A lot of people didn't really know much about her, or they thought, well, maybe this could be interesting. I'll check it out, and they ended up disagreeing with her on a lot of stuff, and that's perfectly fine too.
But you're kind of like post hoc. You're giving them chance to post hoc rationalize, right?
Well, are you assuming that the people involved with Gamergate had 2 years prior sent her death
No,
threats?
no. You
Or
said you interviewed them recently. And I'm saying like since then they probably could have realized, oh, maybe this isn't the hill I actually want to die on. I'll just say I didn't actually care about Anita Sarkeesian at first because it is a little silly to get mad at a crowdfunding thing and not the actual documentary like everyone was saying to me for several years. So I'm just saying, like, we have to factor in, okay, well, you interview these people after the fact. There's lots of room for post hoc rationalization and the ability to perhaps protect one's image by not giving the full details.
Did some people lie? Maybe I don't know, but like that's a specific claim that you could investigate, and you could prove or disprove. You shouldn't just like assume that the people I'm interviewing are the people who harassed Anita Sarkeesian or sent her mean messages in 2012, 2 years before GamerGate even.
Well, we do have these people who have clearly been outed and marked for harassment by an online community. And for you to say like their claims are invalid can't possibly be true in an absolution. There's going to be a lot of nuance here. I'm saying that a lot of people don't spend a lot of their time on the internet victimizing themselves. For instance, when I feel vulnerable in places because I'm trans, for instance, I try calling it out instead of just being like, oh, well, I guess I deserve this or something like that, right? Um, so what I'm trying to get at is like there's a lot of room here to interpret things either way. And I think you're making a lot of assumptions in the first place that people rely on the assumptions that I've had to make when you have interviewed other people who don't rely on these assumptions to come to more or less the same conclusion to some degree. So I don't think you can say this to my face, but you can't say this to us as a whole. So sorry, let me just restate that because I started saying one thing and then I tried to correct myself and it wasn't clear. I think that you can say this to my face. You just can't say this to us as a whole.
Us as a whole being who?
The anti-Gamergate people.
Have I been dismissive of the anti-Gamergate people? I think I've really sought out their feedback throughout the project, including yours actually, on a large number of occasions. Have I not?
Have you watched the Angry Jack series?
I watched, well, 10 years ago probably, or 7 years ago or whatever.
Oh, it might be a lot easier to watch now. I even had to watch it like 3 times because it is very information dense.
I did a response
But
video to him, actually, at the time.
do you still have that?
Sadly not.
You should do another one.
It was, well, I
I'll
don't
even.
do video essays really anymore.
I'm just saying, like, as far as I'm concerned, that is the golden pinnacle of the leftist side criticizing Gamergate. And anything that I'm talking about, I defer to Ian Danskin, which is why I'm not trying to have particular discussions here. I'm not trying to be like, I have the Pandora's box proof of all the Gamergate harassment now, because that's part of the issue is that this was a kind of like a grassroots things self-organized in boards that were either anonymous or pseudo-anonymous. It's such a weird word to say. Pseudonymous? Can you actually say that? Is that a word?
That is a word, yes, where people use
I,
usernames, which is like probably most of the internet outside of like Facebook.
it's probably conflicting in my brain because there's a bacteria called Pseudomonas that I work with, but not like professionally, like in a hobby way. But anyways, what was I gonna say? Oh, right. And because these spaces had limited accountability, that also means that, you know, you can't prove or disprove a lot of these issues. And a lot of us are just left with assumptions. It's easier for you to assume that all these things are minimized.
What do you think I've said, either in this conversation or in other conversations, that minimizes anything?
So, like the comments about her just about them just getting mean tweets or just a couple tweets, for instance, you don't really seem like where would you draw the line where you say like harassment in Gamergate started?
I don't think that harassment was a prevalent thing within Gamergate by and large.
So people, even people who aren't Gamergate and see it from the outside, or aren't like anti-Gamergate quote unquote and see it from the outside, tend to think it was. Do you think like maybe there's some sort of reason for this?
I think that three specific people did media tours claiming that it was, and I think that the games journalism press very much pushed that narrative, and the mainstream media more or less went with it without doing any research at all.
So, sure, maybe there were media tours, many of which were tried to be shut down because I'm just saying Gamergate people seemed a little afraid of what they had to say. Um, to what extent, though, like, how do you know that you aren't just downplaying the voices of victims by saying, oh, well, they did media tours and that's the only reason people think it's about harassment?
I didn't say it was the only reason. I gave a few different reasons.
Okay. Um, so let's kind of hone in on how come there were plenty of other people who also did media tours, quote, uh, in abstract, like Sargon, Milo. I could name, probably at least a dozen if I was good at that, um, who built careers and massive audiences pushing back on what they were saying. How come people largely think of them as being discredited now?
Well, because of their own actions and yeah, basically. I think that Sargon. Well, I don't know about Sargon specifically. I haven't like researched huge amounts of like his current day online presence. But Milo discredited himself in large part because of, well, he flew too close to the sun, for one, and two, because he made some controversial
Yeah,
comments
he said
about
the quiet
pedophilia.
part out loud. Yeah, he said the quiet part out loud. Just kidding. Um, my point being though that the only reason that there is a semi-large group of people who claim that Gamergate wasn't about harassment is because those now discredited voices, people who are not taken seriously as journalists in the slightest, they're at most looked at as pundits. Um, their claims that popularized the movement have either been like debunked, and now you say that the table is still held up by the same legs, but it's not. It's held up by these post hoc rationalizations that you've given it. And my problem is particularly that I think that if you feel if you understand, like I do, the need to listen to victims' voices first, especially when there's more lacking evidence than not, it seems ludicrous for me to assume that they just pulled this all out of their ass.
I think I've been pretty careful in how I've talked about this. I have a whole battery
Not
of
no,
questions
not
about.
not not when you've said like, oh, they just received mean tweets, or oh, it was just a couple of tweets.
Well,
Zoe
I don't
Quinn
know. I
had to
don't know if.
relocate addresses, okay?
Oh, maybe she did. I don't know. I don't know about Zoe Quinn's personal story too much in regards
So
to
let me
her
just ask you
personal
something
life.
though. Let me just ask you something though. Do you know of anybody on the Gamergate side who was forced to do that?
I don't know if Zoe Quinn was forced to do that.
I'm not asking that.
No, but I know people on the Gamergate side who have received pretty significant, pretty significantly bad stuff, myself included, actually, um, on multiple
Okay, so
occasions.
but don't you see how where the minimization comes in here? That you're defaulting to assume to the safety of assuming that she hasn't had to relocate addresses, and instead of just addressing it head on, like, yeah, I guess that would be really awful if she did have to relocate addresses, and maybe I would need to reconsider the fact that that is pretty serious harassment at that point. That is beyond criminal. That's just sinister.
I don't recall this in the FBI report, but
It's in her book.
I do know,
She's willing to state it in a book that could be fact checked if need be.
I do know that much of what I've seen about Zoe Quinn personally, and I've said this before on one occasion, recently actually, it makes me believe that she's probably a sociopath.
But you also
Which
I
again,
could
that
easily
doesn't
see.
mean that people should send her death threats or whatever.
Are
But
you qualified to make that assumption?
I said that that's my personal view. I have come to this view after having
What's your
seen her
definition of a
patterns.
sociopath?
Essentially, somebody. Well, let's look up the technical definition, I guess. A person with a personality disorder manifesting itself in extreme antisocial attitudes and behaviors and a lack of a conscience. Yeah, I think that more or less fits. Though I'm not a psychologist.
Who do you think it's more likely to be the sociopath? Let's just take both um, sides of the leftist argument for granted. The group of gamers with their geek masculinity who feel insecure every time women enter their spaces, which is something I've experienced in debate spaces, versus the people who claim that these spaces push them out. Who's more likely to be the sociopath there? The people who have what seems to be, to me, to be the most antisocial reaction versus the people who are like, hey, could we make these spaces a bit more social?
Well, I don't think Gamergate people were opposed to women in gaming at all, actually. I think that there are a lot of female gamers who supported Gamergate. Gamergate was by and large a pretty diverse and welcoming community of people.
Hmm. So then what do we make of women's experiences of entering gaming spaces and feeling like there's direct, undeserved hostility attacking them?
I think that that's something that we can listen to, and I think that that's something that we can. And I said this at the time as well. I think that the answer to this is to allow people to curate their own experiences. And I say that's still my view to this day. I think that whether that's through dedicated servers or whether that's through a matchmaking system that will match you with people who have a very similar communication style and voice chat, um, I think that that's really the answer here. Let people curate their own experiences. So if you're somebody who wants to do a trash talking dedicated server, you can do that. Or you want to be put into the trash talking matchmaking queue where it'll prioritize matching you with other people who like that kind of thing. I think that that's the answer. Whereas if you want a more of a
So we
friendly,
may I please? We have yet to talk about compartmentalization. What I'm talking about is the default nature of these spaces, particularly in the 2000s and 2010s, where women would enter these spaces and they would be treated as interlopers or sex objects upon arrival. Like you can compartmentalize the spaces all you want. When that's the default, that's still unacceptable.
sure, I don't think that people should be getting sexual comments made about them in voice chat just because they have a female voice. And I don't
But
think
we know
that
that this still happens
anybody in
to this
Gamergate
day,
that I know
right?
at least, uh, anybody in Gamergate that I know at least, thinks that that's a good thing.
Sure, but there's just because, it's easy to say that it's a bad thing doesn't mean that people don't feel some sort of like subconscious sense of security from quote the way things are. Is that fair?
I'm sorry, could you please repeat the question?
Can I rephrase?
Yeah.
So, what do you make of the idea then that it's not about their explicit conscious feelings about these things? It's about the fact that they wanted to push back on change because the way things were gave them a sense of security.
Well, Gamergate was never about, in any capacity really, never about this whole voice chat conversation.
Well, you're coming from like a moderate side, right? But the moderate side was the minority.
Well,
Like Gamergate
I
was
don't
not.
consider myself a moderate necessarily. I didn't consider myself a moderate back then. I probably would have rejected the idea of there being such a thing as a moderate. And I don't
What
think
would you
that.
consider yourself? Just curious.
Well, I would during Gamergate or now.
Yeah, just your political alignment during Gamergate.
Fuck, dude. I don't think I really cared about politics too much. I mean, it also probably depends on when you're talking about in Gamergate. Um, I guess I would generally, I guess I would say probably like moderate, not in terms of like I'm not a moderate Gamergater though. I would say that I like moderate in terms of my politics.
So
Then
I'm
probably
granting you
something
the
like,
moderate
mm,
thing, by the way, as a way of saying I did have to like second like think about it for a second, but what I meant to say was like you weren't part of the violent mob per se,
well, I don't know if
right?
there
Like
was a violent mob.
well, this minimization, but as I'm going to say is like what I'm going to say is like there is nobody who views Gamergate from the outside who thinks that people like you started Gamergate, people who were just trying to have discussions about ethics and journalism. it is 100% understood, including by several. Like every time I search academic papers on this, I find papers saying it's Gamergate started with the people who called for these mob justice style harassments against people like Zoe Quinn and Anita Sarkeesian.
Well, I'm sure you can find plenty of like feminist papers that say stuff like that. Yeah, sure. I'm,
No,
I've not read them
you can't
myself.
just
Well, like
dismiss
Shira
these.
Chess's paper,
This
right?
is
We could talk
again
about that. I have
this
actually
is
read one of
again the
these.
minimization.
I actually have read
This is
one of these. I did a response video to it at the time, in fact.
but this is again the
Well,
minimization
it seems like
of.
there's a minimization that's happening in a very different way regarding.
Well, this is also like the symbiosis that your side kind of gave the far right because they got to say like, "Oh, didn't you hear that there's problems with ethics in gaming journalism? Therefore, how can we trust these things that say terrible things about Gamergate?"
Well, do you think
Again,
that
not a
do
direct
you think that
quote.
the media covered Gamergate well?
The which media? We need to be more
Well,
specific.
by and
I
large, do you think that the viewpoints expressed in, well, pick a specific article. What article do you want to talk about? What article do you think did a good job?
well, it's again, it's the one I'm always deferring to because when you're looking at scientific literature on this, they're not trying to compete with each other, right? So a lot of times, like they're examining something, and that since there's so many things to examine, they don't necessarily compete with each other. Um, as I've said, the whole narrative that I've seen from the scientific literature is that Gamergate fundamentally was a movement of violent mob attacks.
When you say
Just
scientific
as
literature, though, to be clear, you're referring to women's studies papers essentially.
we are assuming that.
Well, let's look at one of them right now.
So
Let's look at this high
I
quality
have
work.
stream. Or do you have it
Am
on
I
the?
screen sharing it?
That's what I was asking you.
I am screen sharing it now. Um,
Okay.
this is by Shira Chess from the University of Georgia. Let's look at this high quality work. It's impossible to get too deeply into a discussion about online harassment without talking about the hashtag movement Gamergate. Gamergate, of course, began in its official capacity by targeting Zoe Quinn, Anita Sarkeesian, and other women in the gaming industry via social media harassment and doxing. The movement, which began in 2014, outwardly insisting that it was about ethics in games journalism, was about little more than identity policing and harassment. Personally, I got lightly sucked into the drama of Gamergate when several of us were accused of being part of a vast academic conspiracy to destroy the video gaming industry. The harassment endemic to Gamergate, however, had some positive outcomes. It forced people, academics, feminists, journalists, and industry professionals to confront toxic behavior that had existed long before Gamergate. For me, however, what was more jarring than Gamergate itself was a hashtag that developed in its wake. Hashtag not your shield. The conceit of Not Your Shield is that those posting under its label were typically not white, cis heterosexual men, but composed of those who had been theoretically othered by the politics and culture surrounding the video games industry. Women, people of color, and those who were non binary often posted images of themselves holding signs proclaiming that so called social justice warriors could not use their bodies as an excuse to attack the patriarchal structure of the video game industry. The use of photos as opposed to word only tweets announced a kind of authenticity. These were not sock puppets, but real people. As a scholar, it is difficult to sift through the rubble of Not Your Shield without emotion. With this is the part of harassment that we don't want to look at, that we don't want to acknowledge. It is difficult to address this without sounding condescending and using well-worn terms like false consciousness. As an academic that has long studied the complex culture surrounding the video games industry, I am generally at a loss when I talk about Not Your Shield. We need a more nuanced conversation if we want to understand the implications of people working against their own self-interests. Furthermore, how do we place our own bodies and baggage into this conversation full of war terminology, shields and warriors? If we are using other bodies as shields, it makes many of us unintentional aggressors. Is this a high quality feminist work in your view? High quality academic work?
No, it sounds more like an op-ed.
Well, it does sound like that. It does sound like that. You're right. Um, but this is apparently what passes as academic work from in media, well,
Okay.
posted on in media res from Shira
I
Chess of
have
the
a
University of
response.
Georgia. And look at that. She says, what does she say? She says that the people involved in Not Your Shield are using their bodies. Sorry, let's that
Right. So
they're
an
what that.
academic writing an op-ed is different from scientific literature, right?
Well, I've looked through the actual scientific literature on GamerGate, like you want to talk about the Women Action Media
Sure.
study?
May I bring something up, please?
Yeah.
I'm not familiar with. I never familiarized myself with that, not out of like arrogance or anything, just lack of time and having done multiple other debates since then. So I need to put, can I actually, let me just make sure I can't share from this thing. I don't think I can actually. So I'm gonna have to send this to you and so that way you can bring it up on stream. Are you okay with the Sci-Hub link?
With what?
Sci-Hub, it's a way to get around paywalls.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, so this will be the last complete paragraph of page 3 on the document. No, not on the document's page numbers, but on like the PDF file.
Yeah, we
Oh
can
God,
talk.
I said PDF file. Oh God. Oh God. Fuck.
uh, but no, I do.
Well, things just got interesting at least.
Let's this article here. Before we get to yours, let's
Please
focus on
do
the one I
not
brought
talk
up.
to me like this. Let's
No, we
go
can go
on
over it, but
from.
I brought this up. I read it out
I
loud.
sent it to
Let's talk
you.
about it. No, we can go over it for sure.
I
But
I'm not super invested in it.
well, of course you're not because it makes it this person seems like an asshole. This sheer chess person.
Well, because I
Um,
brought up scientific literature, you brought up something that doesn't really qualify as like a research
well,
paper.
if these are the
And so I
academics that are
brought up,
talking about GamerGate,
hey, Tachyon, I'm sending you a paper about new media and studies. So this is about a broader scope that isn't just feminism.
I'm not super excited to click on this link now because uh, my web browser extension says that it's a phishing site.
Okay, it's not. I can send you the other paper, but you won't be able to get that paragraph, so I'll have to read it verbatim if that's okay.
You can, but I want to talk about this. This seems like
I
somebody who is dismissing thousands of people and saying that they're working against their own self-interest, implying that they have a false consciousness. And there was a specific claim in here too I wanted to bring up as well.
it was clearly about feeling conflicted between having scientific ethical standards and wanting their research to be objective versus the sheer amount of subjectivity of the material they're going through and the amount of emotional baggage it requires to actually parse through it.
That these people wanted to use their bodies as an excuse essentially to attack to avoid attacking the patriarchal structure of the video gaming industry. This whole thing, and this was a very common thing during Gamergate. This article came out during Gamergate itself, August 2016. This kind of thing was extraordinarily common. This sort of idea that, oh, well, if you disagree with us and you happen to be a minority, well, you're just some sort of sellout, some sort of Uncle Tom, sort of house inward. That's that is basically what this person is saying.
Yeah.
But did this person talk to a single person involved with Gamergate? Did this person ever
Not
ask the
to
people on
speak
Not Your
on.
Shield, what are your opinions actually? I'd like to interview you. I'd like to discuss this with you. I'd like to have a
Well, this is
conversation.
why I think you want to
Doesn't seem
fixate on this
it doesn't se-
because what I'm what I'm what I'm trying to tell you is that like this isn't the standard I'm trying to follow when watching these things. This isn't even the level of writing that I would attribute to Ian Danskin's Why Are You So Angry video essay series, because in that he does try to address how GamerGator saw things, and I think he does that with a lot of his content in a way that has upset leftists before because he does come off to certain radicals as a both-siders. I can see through that because I know media analysis. Woo, I'm so special. But no, just kidding. I think that the important thing is that with this is somebody detailing their experiences, but being a minority voice in a crowd doesn't mean you have to listen to them, right? It can sometimes mean that they are also wrong. And the way that we distinguish this is we ask ourselves, what are the, what are, we analyze things actually, sorry. And we ask ourselves questions that may or may not rely on assumptions because human reasoning, by the way, is not like intrinsically perfect. We can, I guess, maximize that if we try. But at the end of the day, like humans do not talk in reasonable ways. Nobody talks like those super logic brain debaters who say like, "Oh, you have to make an A plus B equals C statement, otherwise it's invalid," as a hyperbolic kind of joke memification of them. But hopefully you know what I mean, right? So I'm trying to get through. I'm trying to get through to you. Like this sounds more like someone's. Like this is literally called a curator's note.
Yeah,
It's a
and
note.
I think that
It's
this
not even
person,
it's not even scientific.
I think that this person, and this is I think this is indicative of a larger problem, and not just the dismissing of people because of their identity, though that is a major issue. I think that this signifies exactly what was wrong with the Gamergate conversation a decade ago. I think that what happened was a lot of people wanted to talk about various issues that they had in the gaming industry, and they also wanted to, sure, a lot of people wanted to disagree with certain opinions that games journalists had, or that feminist activists like Anita Sarkeesian had, and they weren't allowed to have these conversations. They were called monsters, they were called misogynists, they were called shitlords, they were called people with false consciousnesses, and rather than talking to anybody who disagreed with them, the social justice community and the games journalism, many of the games journalism outlets said, you know what, fuck it. We don't care about these people. We don't like these people. They don't fit into our political project. So we're going to shut down the conversation and we're going to talk about them all the time or what we think they are rather than actually have a conversation with any of the people actually involved. And
So,
maybe this whole thing never would have happened at all or it would have been a hell of a lot better of a conversation if there actually was a conversation.
well, we could agree there. So let's start there. What you're saying falls apart for me with the fact that there's no accountability for the Gamergate side of things. So there were examples of things like I'm pretty sure the anti-Gamergate side tried to set, I forget what the hashtag is, tried to set up a hashtag, and that hashtag, um, Carl, if you're listening, remind me what it was. It was supposed to be so that way people could, on both sides, could talk about it without the Gamergate side attacking the anti-Gamergate people, because again, a lot of what this research is saying is that people didn't always understand the entirety of these issues, but they certainly attacked anyone they deemed as being anti-Gamergate because they deemed it as a threat to a space which they've cultivated to have geek masculinity. So, what we ended up seeing, what these researchers, at least in the paper I tried to send you, and I'll send you the non-phishing link, I guess. It's really not phishing because it only asks you for a single link for the paper, not for anything else. But anyways, and the point is that they basically saw that the movement wasn't accelerated by these discussions you were having or the hatred against the discussions you were having. It was accelerated by the hatred from the alt-right, the mass amount, the audiences they either brought in or amassed through their coverage of it, and and the hatred that then co-developed on the left for Gamergate and people claiming to want to talk about ethics in gaming journalism. Now, I'm not going to dismiss the fact that people had on both sides had a spectrum of responses, and I'm saying that, and I'm not saying harassment because again, this isn't quantifiable. It seems. And that, again, when you asked earlier, like, oh, so you're saying that the harassment is non-falsifiable, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that it's unquantifiable, and we kind of do have to stick to what we deem to be the best qualifications for these things, which is why I'm trying to constantly pin you down on where your line for harassment is. Um, yeah, I was addressing what you said. There's been a range, there's been a spectrum of responses on both sides. But the fundamental reason that these people were harassed wasn't because of this ethics and gaming journalism thing. The fundamental reason that when they tried to speak out on their tours, they people tried to shut it down with bomb threats wasn't because of the ethics and gaming journalism thing. It was because the alt-right brigaded the movement and inflated it.
Well, you're assuming that the people involved with Gamergate, who you consider quote unquote alt right, when you say alt right, to be clear though, what you mean is people who disagree with feminist gaming critics, right?
No, no.
Oh, that's what you said
I'm
earlier.
talking about I'm talking about the online wave of reactionary right-wing uh, content creators who amass large audiences by taking on anti-SJW culture.
Oh, so you mean like me?
Perhaps that's what I've always assumed.
Yeah, I don't like social justice warriors, and I have good reasons not to like social justice
What is
warriors.
that? Like?
I
Why are
don't
you
really
afraid of
use
social
terms
justice?
like this. At the
Well,
time,
social justice is a real phrase used in academia. There's no reason to be afraid of social justice.
I'm
The
not
warriors thing is just a
afraid of anything.
mimification of
I
it.
don't. I think it's extremely harmful when you have people in society who want to live in a non-pluralistic world where they want to shut down all discussions and where they want to demonize everyone who disagrees with them. And I think that there are elements of the left who have done this over the past decade. And I think that this is extremely harmful, and I think that it has very negative effects on our society. And I
So
think that
let's
it
go
also
through
is
this.
what led to Donald Trump being elected. I think it's what led to what you call the alt right to some extent, and I think that a lot of this stuff is a reaction. A lot of the right wing Trumpist stuff or right wing far right stuff, people being radicalized. I think that that's because of the left. Elements of the left that have completely and utterly lost their mind.
But how can you? Okay, I'm not going to attack what you said directly, and not because I can't, but because there's a lot to unpack. But you make me wonder, how can you think that that works one way, in the way that favors your argument? But when we try to point out, us terrible SJWs try to point out
I never
that,
called you
hey,
that.
it also works in the other direction, where you radicalized us to hate you because of your nonchalant attitude towards alt-right things, and how that the movement does seem to be co-opted by a more malicious political intent.
Well, first off, I never called you a social justice warrior.
I am one. No, I am one.
All right, fair enough. Whatever.
Let's
You
be clear.
But
I
I
care
don't
about
look.
social justice, and I will fight for it.
Are there people who are radicalized by the right? Probably, yeah. Or by the rights going too crazy, yeah. Sure, absolutely. Though most of that happened after Trump got elected. Most the far left shut down all discussion viewpoint, the social justice warrior viewpoint, or whatever you want to call it,
If you want
that
to add a
was
qualifier
extremely that was
for
that
Trump's
came
election,
up and became a very powerful force in left-wing politics on the internet, at least around the time of
okay, yeah,
Gamergate.
yeah, sure. If you want to add a qualifier for Trump's election, I'll tentatively agree to it for now, but I won't accept it as something like if down the road you say like, oh, well, that's when Trump was getting elected, so it doesn't count, then I'm not going to accept that because it's kind of like, yeah, you're right, that happened around the same time. We can't, separate these things from each other. But I think that the alt-right has, because if you look at a lot of fascist doctrine, has for a long time been plotting to take advantage of online spaces, and Trump was just a segue to that.
I just think you have like the causality very wrong. I think that the far left has a lot of institutional power in terms of the social justice
You
movement,
want to
in
try
terms of
something just real quick? Because I don't want to be wrong about you. I don't think you want to be wrong about me. Why don't we just try to frame things from our side? We'll speak for ourselves, okay?
In what way?
Well, you started talking about the far left. I have a feeling we have different definitions for
Well,
these
I
things and
did
different
qualify that though
perceptions.
by saying in regards to the social justice stuff.
Right. I don't know if I don't know if our perceptions on social justice match. So why don't you make the far right the only character in this when you try to frame this? And I'll try to make my side the only narrative in this so that way we're not talking past each other with our definitions of each other.
Well, it might be useful. I actually made a Reddit post back in the day defining what I thought social justice warriors were during Gamergate.
Okay, sure. Yeah, that sounds
I'm
interesting
not
for
sure
sure.
if I agree with this today. I don't know. We'll see what it says.
And take your time. I'm just gonna smoke a bit and if it's for the book, you can it's not like you have to put the silence in there. I will say, like, to everyone listening, thank you for, putting up with this. I'm enjoying myself. I don't know if everyone else enjoys like the kind of timbre we're at, but
Here it is.
I think it's been a fun discussion. I'm gonna make sure no one's been DMing me vaccines info.
Here's
Got a
what.
whole
Oh, well,
network.
that's pretty long actually.
I'm just kidding. I don't have a network against you. I was gonna joke though that I did. Insiders who are like, we gotta bring down Tachyon. Although I do find it interesting that Food Shops decided to let me back into her server after you posted the video to let me on, but I did kind of persuade her, so who
Posted the
knows?
video to let you on.
Oh no, you posted a video to interview me, and then that same day, the first one you posted, or was it the day after? I think it was the day after. She let me back into her server. I don't. It's probably just coincidence, but I think it's funny. Like maybe
Here's.
she was like hoping to like whisper in my ear, but she hasn't said anything to me, so I doubt it. It's just a funny thought,
Do you want me
not
to read
something I
this,
think is
or do
valid.
you want to read it? Or
Oh no, no, it's your writing, you by all means.
all right,
And
this
you
is
have a
from
much better reading voice, in my opinion.
Sunday, September 13, 2015. Opinion: The problem with social justice warriors. The problem with social justice warriors isn't that they're wrong, and it isn't their ideology. The problem is that they wish to impose their will and values upon everyone else. We've seen this time and time again from mass shaming campaigns aimed at promoting self censorship, such as The Pillars of Eternity, Divinity Original Sin, Batgirl, Spider Woman, and other controversies, to attempts to ban games from retailers such as Grand Theft Auto, Honey Pop, Hatred, etc., and even going so far as to try and get people fired, such as Donglegate, Shirtgate, etc., and sending bomb threats, such as the Protein World incident. These events are undeniable and have come from GamerGazi and other social justice warrior communities. I want to qualify real quick. Um, I
Yeah,
don't.
and I
I'm
won't
not saying that
respond to that part
GamerGazi. I'm
after.
not saying that Gamer. Well, okay, we can. I just want to say I'm not saying GamerGazi sent bomb threats. I don't think I was, to be clear. But go ahead. Respond to that first paragraph.
Right. So, there are definitely angry jacks on the left who do try to go in and change spaces, and I can't deny that, and I can't speak to how much that actually happens. What I do know is that there isn't a lot of leftist literature that actually says to do that. There is no social justice theory that says to do that. What is going on though is that a lot of these spaces that you're talking about that we do actively try to infiltrate are ones that are used for recruiting by people like the alt-right and even neo-Nazi groups. And what we're trying to do in there is not convert them, right? But be a dissenting voice so people might have second opinions and be less likely to take what these people say for granted. Now, I get that we all like to think of ourselves as agents of free will and I'll do my own research. As it turns out, unfortunately, people can be a little bit biased, just a little, okay? So, what it turns out helps a lot is, in this case, contact theory with new ideas. And once they realize, hey, maybe things aren't as simple as this preacher type person from the far right in some rando Discord server is trying to tell me, um, maybe I shouldn't just take everything they say for granted and run with it. Because that's like when you look at a lot of far right terrorism, it's not just people who like try to engage with these ideas, of course. I don't think that's inherently harmful with it with an asterisk, but if you need to, we can get into that. It's the people who take this stuff and start to only see the world in that color. And those are the people who the neo-Nazis, if we're going to be more specific, because far right can be a little vague, the neo-Nazis particularly want to radicalize to that degree, so that way they can tell them, well, you know what the solution is. Well, I'm not saying it's the solution, but and then insert stochastic terrorism.
Yeah, I don't know what that really has to do with what I wrote in this paragraph. You
Well,
said that well, there's no there's you
that's
said that there's no
Tachyon.
you said that there's no
Tachyon.
you said that there's no academic literature calling for people to do this. I don't know if that's true or not, but I'm not responding to an academic paper. I wasn't in
So okay, so
2015.
let's
And I also haven't
so
finished reading the whole thing either.
sure. So what I'm trying to do is frame to you why leftists do this. So when there's neo-Nazis marching in the street, it's not that we're afraid of neo-Nazi ideology. What we're afraid of is the normalization of it, because when things become normalized, they're less criticized. And when things aren't criticized, then we're afraid of neo-Nazi ideology, because it is pretty stupid when you examine it further. But when you don't, then it sounds really scary. And if you're scared by it, then maybe you can be scared enough to do something.
Why are we talking
That's
about
that's
neo-Nazi? Why are we talking about neo-Nazis? What does that have to do with
because
what I
for
wrote in my article or my post?
because for me, that's when I actually see leftists at all trying to actively change how a space works.
Well, they just call everyone who disagrees with them a Nazi.
That's not true.
Yeah, well, I'm apparently
Have
a
I called
Nazi.
you a Nazi?
The people who tried to get my panel, who did succeed actually in harassing me in real life, you could say, um, they did call me a Nazi
So they got your panel.
at Archon banned because of a social media mob that lied about me and implied they didn't say I was a Nazi. They implied because they said that me hosting this debate is akin to me hosting a Holocaust denial debate.
Well, so far, Tachyon, you are a nice guy, but I will point out that like you have professed at least this far to be anti-SJW, and that I would say that that does put you within a group where for a maybe less seasoned leftist, you're indistinguishable.
Well, that seems to be part of the problem, doesn't it? Well, so
Well,
let's go through my
from both
neo-Nazi
sides,
manifesto. I
from
wrote
your
this.
side as well.
Let's go through my neo-Nazi manifesto from back when I was this terrible person during GamerGate. Okay?
That's not what I'm. Okay, Tachyon, you're getting bad faith on me.
Because like you're bringing up Nazis. I'm trying to read my post from 8 years ago.
So what was I doing, right? I was steel manning my argument because that's where I think it works best for you to have a framing of where any culture where this is actually actively done is a part of that. Now, like you don't actually like can I just clarify? You don't see like these sorry, one second. You're not calling like a leftist who goes into a place and just laments about how ableist it is. Uh someone who's trying to you wouldn't label them as someone who's trying to say change the space, would you?
I mean, I don't know. I don't like talk about like changing the space. I don't think I use
You
that kind of
did.
terminology.
The problem is that they wish to impose their will and values upon everyone else.
Yeah, I think that's bad. I think it's bad when anybody does that, including right-wing people.
Okay. Like is it really that bad though?
Uh, yes, I think it's pretty bad when you want to, when you're supposed to be living in a free society, to be shutting down conversations and trying to make everybody think exactly the same way. I think that is bad, yes.
Well, you've been shutting down conversations by saying like, "Oh, any literature you find you must like because it's from a feminist thing." So there
No,
are
it's
all
just
sorts of ways we do
that
this
those are
from
the
both
people who
sides.
write, well, insofar as anybody writes about Gamergate in academia, it's which is pretty rare generally, but like it is gender studies and things like that, which we can talk about those articles, and I was going to until
Okay,
the
the link I sent you wasn't. It's media
I'm not
studies.
saying it was a phishing link, but that's what Firefox, that's what Avast claims it is actually.
Yeah, when I have a chance, I'm just worried I'm gonna make Discord start acting weird. When I have a chance to get the link, um, I will put the original link into. It won't have the. It won't be past the paywall. If you want to get past the paywall, go to Sci-Hub. You'll see it's not phishing because it doesn't ask you to log in or give anything but the link to the paper, and it gets you past the paywall. That's all it is. It's that way we can all. It's the freedom for us to all read scientific literature. And Tachyon, I'm almost wondering maybe you had access to this. Your world would be opened up to how not feminist a lot of this really is.
Well, you
By the
can.
way, also, Ian Danskin cites a lot of sources in his series about Gamergate, including his endnote as well. So I would recommend going through his sources for anything that's still up, because we all know, like, after so many years, the links have tenuous amounts of uh, reliability, but that's not always his fault. And so I say give it a chance. I doubt they're all going to be from feminist publications.
Okay. Well, you said earlier that to seasoned leftists, there isn't a distinction between people who oppose the social justice warriors, quote unquote, and neo Nazis.
Sure. Well, like for me right now, I would say like I know you're not a neo-Nazi, Tachyon. You'd probably be pretty pissed if you found out I was an anti-Semite, right?
I mean, like, I wouldn't like that you didn't like Jewish people and were anti-Semitic if you were.
Sure, but okay. So what SJWs of any sort of like rank want ultimately, um, sometimes more liberal varieties than others, is tolerance. Is actually tolerance. Now, true, there you and let me just run with this for a second because I think it's valid. I'm 90% certain it's valid. That you perceive this as, well, they're intolerant towards you. But really, I think it's they're intolerant towards cultures that people like you can represent, which are in themselves intolerant. And it's kind of a leftist axiom that you can't fight intolerance with tolerance for the intolerant kind of deal. I'm forgetting the actual quote that everyone says,
The
but
paradox
forgive
of
me.
tolerance. We can discuss that later, but let's see, right? I've got you've got me at a disadvantage here, right? I don't know what's all in this manifesto thing I wrote. Um, maybe it's really bad, right? Maybe I was a Nazi during Gamergate. I just didn't recognize it at the time. So let's see whether or not the ideas and opinions that I expressed in September of 2015 are outside the realm of discussion.
Okay, I'll try to let you cook, and I'll respond at the end. Just let me cook at that point.
Or we can go through paragraph by paragraph if you want. It's like what, like 6 paragraphs, 7
Nah,
paragraphs.
that's gonna like at this point that's gonna take a long time. It's better that I just forget half the stuff I'm gonna say anyways.
It seems that the underlying problem is that in their eyes, social justice warriors aren't expressing their opinion. They are defending society at large, quote unquote, from what they perceive to be the advocacy of oppression. But there is absolutely nothing wrong with someone not liking a game because it is or contains elements that are racist, sexist, etc. But that's not where social justice warriors draw the line. They promote the idea that these games and elements are harmful to women and harmful to society. This is the exact mentality that Jack Thompson had. This belief that games and art are harmful to society carries with it certain implications. After all, it's not just your opinion anymore, it's a battleground against perceived inequality. This is apparent even in feminist frequency's work, where rather than focusing on offering suggestions on how game developers can make better characters, she focuses on how games allegedly promote or encourage men to hold negative views and beliefs about women. Even her often quoted phrase, "You can enjoy games while still criticizing sexist aspects in them," paraphrasing, carries with it the implication that there is something wrong with the supposedly sexist aspects about them. These supposedly sexist aspects aren't just a difference in opinion, they shouldn't exist. And after all, they are harming women in the real world. They are promoting negative stereotypes about women and exacerbating gender roles by their mere existence. That's why these developers must be shamed into self-censorship or have their games pulled from store shelves if they don't comply to the demands of those, quote, on the right side of history, unquote. Ghazi and others have been defending their attacks and their worldview by creating a straw man of their critics, by claiming, quote, they don't believe that media can influence people, unquote. No one is arguing that media cannot influence people. In fact, I personally have been influenced at least partially by video games. Ever since I played Final Fantasy VIII, it's always been my dream to start an elite military training academy. You could just ignore that part. Uh, However, there is zero scientific evidence that suggests that video games cause or reinforce negative attitudes towards women. In fact, studies have shown the opposite of that. We would argue that just as a video game isn't going to cause or reinforce the notion that violent actions are acceptable, they also don't cause or reinforce the notion that women are nothing more than objects to be obtained for sexual pleasure. So far, the scientific community is on our side. But even if it weren't, that still wouldn't justify the actions and worldviews of those who wish to stifle creative freedom. I would argue that this is the key difference between a normal feminist and a social justice warrior. In fact, their fight for feminism or social justice really has nothing to do with our opposition to them. We were just as opposed to Jack Thompson promoting the idea that video games are harmful to society when he came at it from a right-wing perspective. I don't care what ideology or political party you belong to. If you are promoting the idea that certain works of art are bad for society, or, sorry, quote bad for society, unquote, then the problem isn't your ideology. The problem isn't the art. The problem is you. Anyway, that's just my opinion. Do you guys agree or disagree? That's my manifesto. Top comment is pretty much. I actually know that guy too, Bob Mugabe. So, am I outside the realms of society? Am I a neo-Nazi? Or was I 10 years ago or 8 years ago? Are you there? Did I lose you?
Yes, sorry. My God, I forgot I was muted. That's embarrassing. So, it's not so much about, we're past the point about whether or not you're a neo-Nazi, right? I've already
Well,
explained that to you.
apparently, because I didn't like social justice warriors very much, and still don't, I guess, um, to seasoned leftists, I am a Nazi. And
No,
apparently,
no, that's not what I said. Tacky, calm the
they
fuck down.
wouldn't
You're
they
not
wouldn't draw
listening well.
much of a distinction. But anyway, no, let's hear what do you think? What I wrote, what
I
I
think
wrote
what
in
you
this
just said was
post.
wrong and not what I said if you actually go back and listen. What I said was that unseasoned leftists can't tell the difference between somebody who stands next to a neo-Nazi and a neo-Nazi when they're saying the same thing, is what I should have added at the end.
Was
So
what I
if
was saying indistinguishable between what neo Nazis would say?
to unseasoned leftists, yes. I
Well,
think
I think those
you're
people. I think those
this
people
this
have a.
article is incredibly reactionary. It's a little misguided on what social justice is really about. So, like, hopefully you understand that, like, people aren't like interloping into gaming by saying like, hey, maybe we could have a wider array of boobs and cleavage in our characters instead of it being kind of predictable. Um, that's that's like like when we don't do that and we just protest, everyone says, "Oh, you don't do anything useful. You just complain all the time. We don't want to hear about it." Blah blah blah. Right? It's not until we actually are effective that anyone starts to have a problem with it. And this is what signals to me that this is a fear of effective social justice, a fear of these spaces actually changing in favor of diversity, which is again what everyone from the outside attributes to Gamergate. Even normies, not just anti-Gamergate people, even normies.
Well, I don't think normies know about Gamergate or care about it really.
Well, most normies don't know about it, but there is a fraction of normies, people who aren't invested in all of the lore. And I would say I'm like sub-normie. So I'm kind of like between one foot in, one foot out because I can't remember a lot of this stuff. I just it's too much person does thing to other person, happens in place kind of deal. And that does not string together well in my head, at least not as well as the STEM fields do. And so what for me, I'm coming at this of I know how this was presented to me, not just from feminists, from people who were leaving Gamergate because they felt like it started going too far once this no pun intended, the far right came in. Um, and what they were was Hunter Avalon an example? I can't recall at the moment. Um, so I'm not going to say he was, but that sorry, one second. It's so hard to mute on this thing. I hate it. That you know, hearing that from people who weren't even necessarily left leaning and kind of saying that as well, like this is no longer a movement about ethics and gaming journalism. Like people are getting mad at me for not being far right enough. And so I have nothing to do with Gamergate anymore. Did you not are you aware of anyone who did that by chance? Because you have a much better recollection of a lot of these things.
Not specifically that. No, I know people. There are a couple of people like Bash Fluff who I interviewed, who only
Right.
cared about
Yes.
ethics in games journalism, and later uh, thought that they didn't. They were more on the social justice side. Like they supported cancel culture and getting people fired from their jobs if they had right wing opinions and stuff like that, or so-called right wing opinions. Um,
So okay, so I think you're straw manning again, and
no,
that's the
no, he
only
specifically says that he supports
no,
people firing Brendan
right.
Ike. That's
But I can't respond to him since he's not here. Um, he doesn't. Nobody really supports social justice culture if they support cancel culture. They kind of don't have much to do with each other intrinsically, because not that many people were actually canceled if you think about it. And B, there's again no social justice literature on the books, on the records. You can go look it up that says we need to cancel anyone. That's not how it
yeah, I feel
works.
like this is a Mott and
That's
Bailey.
just a
I really do. I feel
no.
like no, it is. It is very much
I
so.
feel like
It's
you have
well,
to
there's
assume that
no
to
there's no
protect
academic
yourself.
paper that I could find that says you should get people fired from their jobs and harass people and all this stuff.
No, that would be an
Therefore,
appeal to gaps. That would be an appeal to gaps, not a Mott and Bailey for one
no, it
thing.
very much is because like
Secondly,
so there are people who do the
secondly,
things who do those sort of things, including the person I interviewed, Bashel. I don't have any problem with him, by the way. We have disagreements about topics. But yeah, basically it is a Mon Bailey.
but would you
You're
would you say
there are
Bash
a lot
Fluff
of really
was
bad
was
things. Go ahead. I'll let you do your thing.
would you say Bash Fluff was interested in canceling people for trying to discuss Gamergate because he's here now?
No, he viewed GamerGate as being basically a bunch of like moderate people who had opinions that he disagreed with. A wide variety of people who had opinions that some of them he agreed with, some of whom he didn't. He was pro GamerGate for a while. Later decided that he wanted to become anti GamerGate. Um, and
Right.
yeah,
So
He
My point being
moderated a
though,
debate subreddit, and he specifically wanted to create. He was a pretty reasonable person in this respect, right? He wanted to create a space where people could discuss GamerGate and have the
oh, he is
conversation.
reasonable. He is reasonable for sure. What I'm trying to get at though is that if he was pro cancel culture and he started as Gamergate, this kind of goes towards my argument that I made earlier, and I wanted to make again, but I forgot that Gamergate itself does a lot of the things described in this article right here. Like, there's a lot of evidence for that too, at least as much as there is for the SJW stuff.
Oh, I don't think so.
Okay. Like, just because Sargon says he thinks he's getting canceled, you know that's not evidence of him being canceled, right? He still has his podcast. He's just a mockery now. Like, nobody in academia would ever take him seriously or invite him to like a discussion about issues that matter.
Well, we may have different opinions about what the issues that matter are, but so I asked you earlier, do you think that what I wrote in my really long post is outside the realm of discussion, outside the realm of discourse? Is that something that should have been
No,
shut
I've had
down?
this discussion like 100,000 times, and honestly, nobody from the left is really that mad at me for having it. They don't support me for having it, which is a different thing, of course.
So why shut down the conversation? Not you per
Nobody's really shutting,
I mean they did.
nobody's
They
really
very
shutting down the
much did
conversation.
during Gamergate. And
So
and they
if
still shut
I'm
down
like,
conversations all the time.
I'm, you expect me to take this for granted, but you won't take for granted that the victims of Gamergate from my side were very much harassed almost into non-existence, having to move and shit like that.
Well, again, I haven't looked into the specific evidence regarding Zoe Quinn and whether or not she moved or not. I don't really care. Look, did people receive harassment? Sure. A lot of people received harassment on my side, including myself, and nobody cares about that. I don't get articles. I
It's
don't
not
get.
one to one though, because
I
your
don't know.
side
I know
isn't
why.
your
No, no. Why? Why
while
should?
while
Wh-
your side may be diverse and nobody's claiming that your side isn't diverse, your side did represent geek masculinity, and that is a form of privilege that was particularly used against women during Gamergate.
do you think that? Well, do you think that me writing this article here? Do you think that my article Do you think I would have agreed with that framing? That I would have said that I'm representing geek masculinity?
Well, no, because I'm trying to explain to you what this is, and it's our discussion keeps getting chopped up, to be honest.
Because it seems like you have an idea of what Gamergate was, and that this idea is that Gamergate is geek masculinity, and none of the people involved in Gamergate seem to agree with that framing.
Well, I don't need them to. So in that link, like geek masculinity is something that is widely discussed in literature, not just in feminist literature, in most media literature discussing online spaces with anything to do with where misogyny comes from. You know, that doesn't make it inherently feminist. It, unless you think that like just talking about misogyny makes something feminist.
I think that when you start talking about things like geek masculinity, you're probably bought into some sort of ideology, most likely.
Do you not see a subculture on the internet that may be catered more towards men than women?
What does that even mean, right? Because like there are all sorts of there are all sorts of subcultures in society or hobbies or whatever they happen to be that are more male dominated in terms of their demographics or more female dominated in terms of their demographics, and that's like fine. I don't really care as long as
Let's
people aren't being excluded on the basis of their gender. I don't care.
I'm not just saying this because Anita Sarkeesian said it, but have you've obviously heard of the male gaze. You've probably looked into what feminists think that is, right?
Regarding female characters and how they're portrayed in media. Sure, yeah, I guess. I mean, I haven't like done like a huge like deep dive into the topic necessarily.
Right. So let's just, for the sake of argument, take for granted that the male gaze is at play in at least some video games. And when technocultures develop underneath that, um, that empowers them on one hand to feel more masculine, even though and this is kind of like a defiant masculinity that happens because society, they deem society to be rejecting of them, but that one that also feels threatened by femininity entering because the masculinity is so intrinsically tied with the technoculture.
Yeah, see, I think that see this is something I've said before, and you're going to not like me saying this. I think that you like to talk in these very broad narratives about like what you think certain things are, including the Gamergate conversation.
Well, these are narratives, but they're lenses more than that that are tools to help us actually understand how certain things have come to be what they are. So, for example, if you want to understand why a toxic, sorry, I'm not trying to say toxic, and that's why it's pissing me off that I keep saying it. And if you're mad at that, I'm mad at it too. Please try to forgive me. Why these technocultures surrounded around geek masculinity tend to feel so threatened and skeptical by these changes. And it's really because of the fact that a lot of their understanding of themselves, their personal identities, came from that lens. And the mere existence of women who may want something different uh, makes them have to confront internally that maybe this lens is problematic. And it's easier for them to get mad at the people who present that new idea than to simply say, you know what, maybe it's time for a change. Maybe I don't want to be problematic in the ways that I perceive these things and understand how it may in fact hurt other people, even though it doesn't hurt me.
Yeah, no, I think that that's just a bunch of nonsense. I really do. I
But
don't think that
realize
that's
that
what
like
Gamergate was about.
you're only doing that from the privilege of doing that. You're basically saying it's an impossibility, which is which shows that you don't have much of an argument for it. You might have some sort of rhetorical trick or something, and you're good at those. I have taken a lot of the bait here because I do think you're also good faith, even if these are a lot of the things that you tell yourself. So what if we're honing in on the issue, because you've tried honing in on things, and I tried to, at least indulge you a bit until I felt like it wasn't worth it. Um, do you think that the male gaze in itself having an effect on people is an impossibility? Where does this actually become an impossibility for you?
I don't. I mean, I'm not like a researcher onto the male gaze. I don't really care about the male gaze. My view, and it was the same during GamerGate too, is that all different types of games should be able to exist. If people want to make games where you got jiggly titties and you're playing volleyball with each other, that's 100% fine. Go make that game. The market will determine whether or not it's successful. If you want to make games
Well,
with
not
you want to make games
necessarily.
that are like Gone Home, that are telling the story of a lesbian love story, like you go ahead and do that. That's your prerogative too. Go make your game. That's your artistic freedom. The market will determine whether or not it's successful. That's my view. You should be free to make whatever you want. You should be free to play whatever you want. Trying to police what video games other people can play is extremely lame, and it's anti freedom. It's illiberal.
Well, except for two caveats, right? Unless you're Zoe Quinn making Depression Quest, and especially like it's not just financially driven, it's socially driven. So, for example, in World of Warhammer, you because there's a lot of uh, and a lot more now, uh, uh, customization of your character, or maybe I'm thinking of another game, but there's another game where you would think on paper that like this will be a diverse game. People of all stripes and colors will want to play this, and it turns out that no, it just gets dominated by this geek masculinity. And when I do have a paper that's definitely on that in my bookmarks, so I'll also put that into your general once we're done.
Can you point to a single instance where I've ever said that Zoe Quinn shouldn't be allowed to make whatever she wants to make?
No, but you alone do not make up Gamergate,
Do,
right?
can you point? Can you point to a single? I wonder if even one exists. Um, can you point to? a single example of someone saying that she shouldn't be allowed to make Depression Quest?
Yeah, GamerGate basically threw a fit and made up a bunch of lies about her and her game. That's like
Well, okay,
what else
first
is
off,
that?
no. And two, Depression Quest came out well before Gamergate. You're referring to
Yes.
so Zoe Quinn claimed, and this claim I don't know if it's true or not. It is a
Wait, you
contested
need this to
claim.
be specifically about Depression Quest instead
Well,
of
you brought it
the
up,
general
so
point.
let's
The
let's talk
obvious
about
the
Depression Quest.
obvious point
Who's
the obvious
trying to
point
stop
is
Zoe Quinn from making Depression
no,
Quest?
it's not about Depression Quest. It's about Zoe Quinn and the fact that she clearly was not welcome to make games after, the developer she was with got fucked with. She actually, I think she was going to make a move to Ireland anyways for a job, and she went to go and she was doxxed there, so she couldn't stay there and lost that job opportunity, if I'm recalling from the book correctly. So somebody can go check out the book and fact check me on that if you want, or go find other sources if you so need. Just don't let it be from Gamergate.
Yeah, again, I don't see why. Again, I don't support anybody getting doxxed. I don't think virtually anybody in Gamergate supports people getting doxxed.
But if I was using narrative like you do, I'd say she got canceled there.
By the doxers?
Yeah.
I mean, we could use that term, sure, I guess. Um, in that case, like half the people in Gamergate got canceled, and somehow
And anti Gamergate.
their stories don't matter. Apparently, Zoe Quinn's conscious experience is the only thing that matters. It seems
Well,
that
let's
way.
just be clear. Let's just be like, a lot of names I don't. So, but like the majority of this discussion focused around these women, but there were plenty of people on the anti Gamergate side who were quote unquote canceled as well. And the problem with that is that that gives you like the fact that I can't really navigate that super well, and I don't have, well formatted notes on different people's names and stuff like that. It means that it gives you the luxury of pretending like none of that happened. But I've already pointed out, like, there were ways that the anti-Gamergate side actually tried to set up a platform to have a discussion. That's the opposite, right? Of what
Where
you're
where
claiming
was this? Oh,
anti-Gamergate
you're
was like
okay. No, no,
on
no,
Twitter.
no,
There was
no,
a
no,
Twitter
no,
hashtag.
no, no, no.
Yes,
No, no. Hang
yes,
on. Let's actually talk about
yes.
this, okay? So, Gamergate's blowing up into this massive online movement, and some people, presumably people who don't like Gamergate, say you need to change your hashtag and start using this other hashtag instead. And you know what?
Who did they say that to? Who did they say that to, though? They said that to the people who were claiming that Gamergate is actually just an attempt to have rational discourse, right? So what would happen is like an SJW like me would encounter a Gamergater, and I've never done this myself, but it makes sense that I would do this if I was aware of this hashtag at the time. I would encounter a Gamergater. They'd be making some stupid claim about Anita Sarkeesian. I'd prove it wrong, and they'd be like, "Why do you have a problem with us? We're just trying to have a discussion about ethics in gaming journalism." And what they would say is, okay, well, here's a hashtag that we've made so that way we can do this. That's away from all this shit flinging, right? Go here and do that. And what happened was it got spammed with furry porn so no one could have that discussion. And it wasn't by the people who created it because that doesn't really make a lot of fucking sense, does it?
Yeah, I don't know who specifically posted furry porn, but this
Let's use
idea that
Occam's razor here.
this incredibly stupid idea that like
The simplest
hang
answer
on, you're using a
is
hashtag that
Tachyon.
I don't like. No, you're using a hashtag that I don't like. Therefore, I made this special hashtag just for you. Why don't you go and abandon all of your friends and abandon the movement that you support and go use this stupid hashtag that I made that isn't even about that's completely controlled opposition. And two, it's a fucking hashtag, okay? The idea that if you just make a new hashtag, you're going to like stop bad stuff from happening,
So who
insofar
asked
as
you
any
to
bad stuff
abandon your
did happen,
friends?
is
Who
incredibly
asked you
stupid.
to Like, if your friends are the people who are doing all the shit flinging from the Gamergate side, then yeah, they were asking you to abandon your friends and just be a better person. But if your friends were the people who also wanted to have discussions on ethics and gaming journalism, then that hashtag was there for them too, and that you didn't have to abandon them.
Yeah, no, this is an incredibly dumb argument that people need to abandon this hashtag and start using
I think
this
you're being
other.
dismissive because that's easier for you to cope with.
No, I reject the idea. Like
Okay.
why don't we? Why don't, oh, look at how many people have died due to Black Lives Matter protests. Quite a few, like dozens of people have been killed. Um, Now, would we say, oh, well, look, there's a lot of toxicity with Black
So
Lives Matter hashtag,
the past
guys. We need to make a new
of
hashtag. That way there's no more toxicity, guys. Like,
of the
oh,
past
come on.
100 out of the past 100 mass shootings in America, which would have happened within less than a year, how many were leftists and how many were far right wingers?
I
I can
don't
say
know,
zero.
but none of this has to
I can
do
say
with
zero
Gamergate.
leftists. I can say zero leftists with confidence.
I
I can
don't know if you
say
could say that,
non-zero.
actually. I
I
don't
can
know if
say
you could say that,
non-zero
actually.
amount of right wingers for the mass shooter side. So I'm just going to point out that you can make these straw man arguments, or not straw man, these red herring arguments about who's more violent all you want, but the fact comes down to it that again, anybody who isn't already biased in favor of Gamergate sees it as the more violent side, hands down.
Okay, how many acts of violence were committed in Gamergate?
Nobody knows; it's not quantifiable. We've been through this,
Well,
and we are looping.
it
So
seems
we
like
are
it's
looping,
zero.
Tachyon. We are looping. I do have plans tonight.
Okay. Well, I mean, we could get into the question list if you want, but you like weren't really paying attention to Gamergate too much as it was happening. So I don't know if there's gonna be a lot of utility in that, but we can and rush through that if you want to.
Nah, I've looked at it and a lot of it was like, I don't want to answer that. I can't answer that. I can't answer that. Don't want to answer that. So I appreciate you offering, but I'm going to decline.
Okay. Well, what do you want to talk about?
Well, just in general, like, where did you get this notion of SJWs that like they're authoritarians? Like, sure, like we can be authoritative. There's a big difference. But you know that like leftists hate authoritarianism as well, right? Like when you
I don't
actually
know if
look at
that's
that.
true.
So you know that Overton window thing? If you look at that, um, no matter how detailed it is, and it can get pretty fucking detailed, um, there's always two axes, right? What are these axes?
What, are you talking about the
Do you
political
recall?
compass?
Yes.
I talking about like authoritarian versus like economic libertarianism, or I mean like
Well,
what does
just
this have to do
general
with Gamergate?
libertarianism. So the point being that, you know, leftists aren't necessarily authoritarians, right? So at best, you've only targeted the top right corner of leftism and the far right and of that corner or far left of that corner at best. Um,
Okay, like
in reality,
Gamergate's a diverse group of people. We got a lot of left wing people in it. I'm a pretty
in reality, just let may I please.
yeah.
It is crucial for you to get the key takeaway here. In reality, the majority of people who push back on the far right are pushing back against perceived authoritarianism from the far right. So could you please address that?
Yeah, I push back against perceived authoritarianism on the far right all the time. In fact, I was an anti alt right YouTuber. You probably didn't know that about me, actually.
But you were somehow still an anti-SJW YouTuber as well, which
I know,
is
right? It's almost
uh,
as if they're not mutually exclusive.
well, here's the funny thing is that if you're going to be wrong in the ways that suits the narrative of the far right, you still might have been more of a tool for the far right than the far left.
Well, I don't want to be a tool of the far left, that's for sure. I don't want to be a tool of the far right either.
But
You
why are
asked
you
me,
more scared of the far left?
I'm not, I mean, scared is a weird framing, but
Well, okay, but the way you framed it was that you're absolutely certain you don't want to be a part of the far left, and you're, reasonably certain that you don't want to be a part of the far right, like as if there's a distinction between the two.
no, I think actually I'm probably right now. I view the far right as being a greater threat to society, to liberal democracy.
Okay, yeah, and that's what I was trying to get at with the mass shooter thing, right? It's like if you're gonna
Well, I
really get
don't
into
think
who's more
mass
violent
shootings.
at the end,
I don't think mass shootings are a good way
well,
to
if you're getting
determine who's
into
a
who's
threat to
more violent,
democracy or not.
the people who support gun rights despite the mass shootings in their countries more so than not might be a bit of a red flag. Just saying.
Or maybe there's a large number of people in this country who disagree with you about guns, and that's okay.
they can disagree all they want. They do not win debates against me. I'm way too well prepped for that at all times.
Well, hey, go debate it, go engage with people. That's free speech. That's what I'm for.
Well, Tachyon, what are you gonna do after this? You need to start hosting debates so I can chirp at your freaking server members.
You can debate
Like
them anytime
what
you want.
why not do like a call-in show where you cover news, like refreshing news, like not to say like not Gamergate ever. Like you can obviously follow it, but just like assume we've heard we've all heard you talk about Gamergate, right? It's at this point I want to see Tachyon be a content creator.
Well, right now I'm working on a book, and you're probably not going to like the directions I go with my next books after this one.
Well, here's my question. With this book, what's the format? Are you taking this all word for word? Is it all just transcripts?
Basically, though I've learned that direct transcripts are not the best way necessarily.
It's
This- But
borderline plagiarism. Not that I'm accusing you
no,
of that, just
well,
that you want to avoid that.
everyone who I've interviewed for the it's not plagiarism. Everyone who I've interviewed for the book has agreed to participate in the book, and they
Sure.
know
Yeah, and
that.
it's just at the end of the day though, you know, like I said, I think like actually unpacking what your emotional state was during Gamergate and maybe if you had any implicit biases during that time would just really help because I'm telling you right now, the academic literature, especially like that paper that I posted for you, that you're admittedly skeptical because your browser doesn't like it, and so I criticize your browser, not you. But it it's pretty unbiased. Like I'm not reading a lot of colorful language. I'm not reading a lot of slanted language. It's getting to how social media platforms had algorithms which particularly accelerated your side of the Gamergate discussion in a way that nobody could have really predicted and that we arguably hadn't seen before.
I mean, I
So
don't know what to
there's
tell you. I mean, I don't really care. I mean, like
I'm just
I believe in freedom of speech. I don't think that.
that you seem to have emotional stock in assuming that's like that's going to be like some sort of feminist thing, but it isn't. It is straight up like the most unbiased thing that I've read about Gamergate from academic literature so far, only because some other things like, you know, anytime you write a conclusion about something, you're going to have to sound a little biased in favor of the conclusion, right? And the conclusions are not in your favor, in my opinion. So I wouldn't say that they were like as like sterile as this paper was or as sanitized, but that's because this is media literacy and not a from gender studies or media studies, I should say.
Yeah, I mean, you asked earlier. Well, you asked two questions. One at the very beginning. You said who should be held accountable for the death threats that Anita Sarkeesian or someone like that received? And I have a very simple answer for that. The people who sent them.
So do you think that that's like so this is where social justice comes in, right? Because do you think that the criminal justice system has the capacity to actually hold all those people as accountable as, you know, who would be?
Probably not because most of these things happen on Twitter, and you know what? If you're receiving a death threat on Twitter, yeah, it sucks. People shouldn't do that. It's probably not the end of the world though. Everybody receives death threats on Twitter.
Right, but when that's coupled with doxing, then your life's kind of in danger. And here's the thing, right? Like you can
Well,
maybe weather
apparently
that.
not, given that nobody
I have some,
actually got hurt. But I don't support again. I don't support doxing people, and I don't
except
think
for the
anybody in
displacement of
GamerGate. I
Zoe
don't think
Quinn.
anybody in GamerGate supports doxing people either, or at least the
Tachyon, you
vast,
were
vast,
factually
vast, vast,
incorrect
vast
there.
majority.
You're factually incorrect there, as far as either of us know, that Zoe Quinn was displaced from their home. That's real. That's real damage. Let's be real about that, okay?
Well, if she says that, okay, whatever. I also faced real harassment, and so did a lot of other people. People have lost their people have tried to get people fired.
Right, but I
People
said
have.
damage
Oh,
because
but
you said there was no
you don't
harm.
think what happened to Tim Saray, which Zoe Quinn was in large
I
part
didn't say
responsible
that.
for.
You're putting words in my mouth.
Where are the hundreds of articles talking about Tim Surrey? Well, actually, there are quite a few articles talking about Tim Surrey, but they're all demonizing
You
him as
know I'm
being a
about to avoid
misogynist.
this, right? You know I'm about to avoid this because my arguments do not rely on these people.
It just seems like, well, look, this person on the internet received some bad messages, possibly even some death threats, and a bomb threat got called into New Sarkeesian's event. That's very sad. I don't support that. Somehow we're just going to assume that that's the GamerGate people doing that, and then we're also going to ignore all the stuff that happened to the pro GamerGate people, because I guess fuck them or whatever.
You're always so close yet so far. What I'm saying is that your ability to be nonchalant about these things and minimize them is a privilege that a lot of quote angry jacks have. And that privilege particularly comes from the fact that when people who are generally white and male, and this is generally speaking, so yeah, you might find minutia, counter examples, but in general terms, white males, when they get harassed and even in most cases doxxed, aren't under threat of anything actually happening. They can go on with their careers even sometimes. When it happens to minority groups, especially like if we were to get into a disabled black woman of color, it becomes more and more a threat because of the ways that social justice is trying to address that which dehumanize them.
Yeah, I don't know if that's true in the data, but I think that the answer to whatever that is, if that is true even, I think the answer to that is that people just shouldn't send death threats to people.
No, I think it's proof that the dehumanization of women is inherent in a lot of techno cultures where geek masculinity reigns, because even Anita Sarkeesian announcing she was going to raise money for a video series got massive backlash and started the harassment campaigns against her. Like you can claim that your side cares about freedom of speech all they want. You watch horrible things happen to Anita Sarkeesian and we're like, yeah, I'm safe from that.
Well, I don't know what you mean by my side. Please define that.
The people who weren't quite the alt-right, but were definitely a part of Gamergate still.
So people like me who had, I guess, from my perspective, pretty
I'm not
reasonable
bringing in
critiques.
no, you okay, so for the first problem with your critique is that you kind of missed the mark on what social justice is. It and instead you seem to prefer to just attack this straw man social justice warrior person that doesn't actually exist.
Except for all the
Well, I mean,
people who did do the things that I specifically outlined inside of the post.
so I think it should be really telling though, like how much experience matters here on both sides, because at best, I would say like maybe you've hit some very inexperienced people who have just encountered the idea of social justice. Like there's no way you can go through a first year of university of social justice and peace studies and still act like the people that you're characterizing, because it is a nuanced issue. And but the fight for social justice was very clear in the Gamergate thing, because whenever women tried to speak out, the the absolute hatred towards them became clear to everyone on social media who wasn't within those technocultured spaces.
Yeah, no, I think if you're putting ideas out there, people have the right to criticize those ideas. And
But they didn't just
whenever you're putting
criticize it.
idea, oh, yes, the Gamergate people, yeah, pretty much, they just
They
criticize
just
those ideas,
criticized it.
pretty much, yeah.
Okay, so they're you're minimizing again.
No, I'm not minimizing the Gamergate people specifically. Yeah, they pretty much just criticized it.
Let's leave it there.
Okay.
Tachyon, thank you for having me. I think this has been a good, sorry, I think this has been a good interview, and I enjoyed talking to you.
Yeah. Uh, yeah. Thanks for coming on. How did the conversation go the way you thought it would?
I didn't really have a format planned, just like I had an approach coming that I didn't want to be necessarily inflammatory with you. I hope that that came through. And, I didn't want to get too much into specifics.
Okay. All right. Well, hey.
I didn't have a lot of time to prep. I had a lot more time allocated to prep, but between me having massively terrible, oh, and I'll close this. I'm not streaming, but I'll close the stream so that way you don't dox yourself to me.
Yeah,
And
I'll raid tomfoolery.
and so what was I gonna say? Anyways, the key point was
We're still live,
that
by the way. I'm about to shut it down just yet. I was gonna say goodbye to
yeah,
the
yeah.
stream chat first and stuff, but go ahead. I just don't want you to
The
think that we
key
were off air.
point the key point was that I knew I couldn't navigate a lot of these specifics, nor did I really want to, and I didn't avoid that to talk past you, but just to avoid getting into the weeds.
Can I ask you something on the record? Or you can, or if you want it off of the record because the interview's over, we can say.
Yeah, you need to ask these. You need to ask these things off the record first. Is it because it's personal?
No,